For me, today was a snow day. I'm a New York City resident. I live in Brooklyn. This is my lovely Brooklyn apartment that I often reference. And because I am a New York City resident, uh, we did have a huge snowstorm today. I was planning to go on into the office, but that got a call after I'd already departed telling me, not today, not today. And so I went home. I was able to do some work from home. It was lovely. I was able to catch up on some reading. I am, as folks may have heard, I am detoxing a bit from social media. I did stop tweeting, and I will probably not tweet very much tomorrow. I'm trying to just detox from Twitter mainly, but a little bit from Facebook. But I'm here live with you all tonight, and I'll probably be back to full speed on social media come Wednesday. But I figured, why not take the opportunity to talk with all of you? All right, Jason and I fighting. I don't think we're fighting, but I'll talk about that. And the way we do this is I make my opening remarks. After I make my opening remarks, then from there, we do the roll call, and I call you all out as I see you. We find out who the audience is. It's good to know who is out there watching. And then I answer your super chat questions, and then we're done. And that's how we do the show. That is our format here on this YouTube channel. So be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. Folks, I'm telling you to be sure to hit the subscribe button because I continue to get messages from people that they were unsubscribed. I continue to get messages from people that they're not getting notifications, so be sure to hit that notifications bell. And also, one weird thing that has been happening is you can't Google some of my videos, which is very, very, very weird. Philosophers, Althusser, Badiou, Zizek. Althusser, Badiou, Zizek. So, folks, if you want to be in touch with what we're doing here, be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the like button. One thing I do want to let people know is that if there is a section of these lives that you like, that you absolutely like, cut it for your channel. Cut it for your YouTube channel. People are already doing this, and it's tremendous. It is absolutely tremendous. There's a channel called And Remember that has already cut some great clips. There's a channel called Quindy that has cut some great clips. I'm not going to sue you if you cut this. In fact, they've made a whole out-of-context Twitter account for me where people jokingly take, and in kind of good humor fashion, take little things I said out of context that kind of sound funny. So if you like something I've said here, by all means, cut it, put it up on your own channel. I'm not going to sue you. I might rip it from your channel and put it on mine to save me the time of cutting it. But trust me, I have no problem with you doing that. I'm going to make sure I see all the chats here. But that's a great thing to do. And a lot of great plans are in the works. I am frustrated. I am frustrated with this pandemic. There is so much work that needs to be done. So much work that needs to be done in our country and in the world. We are very frustrated. We are living in the last days of capitalism. We are living in the last days of imperialism, right? We are very lucky to be alive in the time that we are living in, folks. It just doesn't seem that way. It seems like this is not a good time to be alive. So many young people are saying, my goodness, my parents, they just graduated high school and they got a good paying job, enough to buy a house and raise kids. And a lot of people are saying, how is this the best time of the pandemic? I mean, I can't see my friends. I'm stuck in my parents' house. We don't realize that all of this, genocide in West Papua, we don't realize that all of this is capitalism breaking down. They did not have a revolution in the 1930s. The Communist Party did amazing work fighting fascism and building united fronts and organizing labor. They didn't have a revolution. 1960s, the big peace movement, big civil rights movement, the rise of the new communist movement and all that, didn't have a revolution. There could actually be a revolution in our time. There actually could be a transition of the United States towards socialism in our time. With what is going on in our time, it is very, very possible that we could build a socialist society, that American capitalism in its ruins could transition to a socialist state. That is possible in our time. And that is why we should all be deeply thankful that we are living in these times, as awful as these times seem, as unstable and unpredictable, as awful economically as they seem. We are living in the last days of American capitalism. And there are people in the 1960s who would kill to trade places with us. There are people living in the 1930s who would kill to trade places with us. There are people, old boomers, there are old folks from the greatest generation who are heartbroken that they never got to see the revolution. But we are going to live to see the revolution. It is happening. There's a great interview I heard years ago with a very famous communist organizer named Samuel Darcy. Samuel Darcy. Sam Darcy. He was the leader of the dock workers of San Francisco during the 1930s. He led the 1934 strike in San Francisco. Google him. Sam Darcy. Sam Darcy. Sam, S-A-M-D-A-R-C-Y. Samuel Darcy. And he's interviewed about his leadership of the Communist Party. Versailles Treaty. He's interviewed about his leadership of the Communist Party in the 1930s, and he talks about how Stalin told him, as a leader of the Communist Party, in the 1930s, he went to the Soviet Union and he met with Stalin, and Stalin told him that the only way that a revolution can really happen is when the old system comes apart. Communist revolutions only happen when the capitalist system comes apart, and that creates an opening for the revolutionaries. You can have the best revolutionary organizers ever. You can have the most dedicated people. But if the old system is not crumbling and falling apart, there really is no opportunity. And that's why in the 1930s, despite the fact that the communists did amazing work, they weren't able to overthrow capitalism. In the 1960s, the system was not coming apart. In fact, there was a booming economy in the United States. So we weren't able to have a revolution. But now we are heading toward the situation where we could very easily, I think within 10, 20, 30 years, see a socialist America, right? The thing that William Z. Foster and Eugene Debs were only dreaming about could happen, right? Thoughts on the way the Dems in power are taking us. Dems in power taking us. So we should be thankful. Thankful. As hard as things get, remind yourself of this every day, right? Because I've had to remind myself of this as I get frustrated and all of this. We are living in the last days. We are living in the last days of American capitalism. We are living in the last days. And as awful as this is, think about all the people who would kill to be in our shoes, who were envious, all the great revolutionaries who died on their deathbeds. On their deathbeds, they said, gosh darn it, I am not going to see the revolution happen in my homeland. And now, you and me, we are going to see the United States become socialist. I'm convinced. I am convinced that we are living in the last days. But that hits us with a huge responsibility. Because if we as a generation let this moment pass, who knows when it will come again, right? The door doesn't open over and over and over again. And if the door opens and we are not able to walk through it, that opens the door to things getting very, 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 very ugly. Fascism, not, Donald Trump tweeting racist things. Actual Nazi fascism. Fascism in Germany, fascism in Italy, fascism in Spain. Fascism comes after the revolutions fail. When the communists are unable to seize the moment, that's when actual fascist autocracies are created. We are living in the last days of American capitalism. It's crumbling all around us, but now is the time for us to take up history's challenge, to rise to the moment. If we don't take personal responsibility to seize this moment, then we are failing. And I'm doing the best I can to get the Center for Political Innovation going. I have a whole business plan of how we are going to move forward. And people are doing great work everywhere, but we're all frozen because of this pandemic. But as the restrictions are lifted here in the United States, the vaccine, and that's a nightmare the way that's going right now. But as the vaccine as things start opening up, we have to be able to spring into action. Because as much as we're going to spring into action, the Trotskyites and the synthetic left are going to swing into action. The far right and the fascists and the libertarians are going to swing into action. So those of us who know what the answer is, rocks, invasion, Kuwait, justified. Capitalism enables fascism. Those of us who know what the solution actually is have got to be able to swing into action, right? As the restrictions start getting lifted, we are going to start building an IRL, mass educational campaign to awaken Americans and bring them to socialism. Just repeat to yourself, we are living in the last days. These are the last days. These are the last days of American capitalism. Because it is a reality. What you're seeing all around you, this is exactly what communists have always been warning about. There would be a mass disease, and the capitalist profiteers would be so disorganized they wouldn't be able to handle it. There would be an economic situation with mass unemployment, and the capitalists would leave millions of workers behind and sell them out. There would be an international situation where Russia and China are rising, and the third world is rejecting the rule of Western capitalism, and the imperialists would be desperate to hold on to their power and moving in the direction like they might launch a new world war. This is the revolutionary situation that revolutionaries have talked about for decades, for centuries in this country. People have said if something like this happens, a revolution might actually be possible. That is what people have been saying for years. They said, okay, revolution, that'll never happen in the United States. But never say never. There could be a situation where there's like a pandemic and the government is so disorganized that it can't handle a response. There could be a situation where millions are unemployed and desperate and suffering. There could be a situation where the black workers and the white workers and the whole working class is coming together to reject and repudiate their police state. There could be a situation where the third world is rejecting the rule of American capitalism and the bosses in their desperation turn to a third world war, but it looks like the population at home is ready to turn the guns around. Right? I mean, these are the fantasy situations that revolutionaries have dreamed up in manifestos for years. We're heading in that direction. But if we're not responsible, we don't take the task at hand seriously. If we do stupid things like advocating violence, if we do stupid things like advocating, adventurism and isolated acts of extremism and terror, if we do stupid things like tell Americans they're our enemies and write off huge sections of the American population, if we do stupid things, if we don't act in a principled way, we don't act in a responsible and principled way in a moment like this, we're gonna be destroyed. We're gonna fail. Right? And that's why tonight, I'm not going to do it now. I got plenty more things to talk about before we get to this. I'm actually going to read to you from this book, The Twilight of World Capitalism by William Z. Foster. 1949, William Z. Foster wrote this book. All right. William Z. Foster wrote this book. And in this book, he talks about how the USA could go to socialism. I'm going to read to you William Z. Foster talking about how the USA could go to socialism and how the communists should address this, not advocating ultra-left adventurism, not spitting in the face of the American workers. He talks about it. It's beautifully written in here. So later in the live, I'm going to read to you from William Z. Foster. I'm just going to read to you what the greatest American communist, the personal friend of Mao Zedong, said about how the United States would go to socialism and how communists should operate in a time like this. So I'm just going to read to you from this. But, so what's the super chat here? Trotskyism, 21st century, socialism, not true socialism. So I'm gonna read to you from that. I got plenty of unnamed orange beverage right here. I'm shaking it before I pour it. You got to shake it before using. Thank you, Jared, for the super chat. We're going to talk about all of that. I'm going to read to you what William Z. Foster said about how the USA could actually go to socialism. That'll be later in the live. But we're going to talk, first of all, about Myanmar. I'm talking about Myanmar, right? Because a lot of people have been messaging me. What do you think, Bloodlands? what do you think of Myanmar? So here's the thing: there's been a military coup in Myanmar. Right, the leaders of the elected government have been arrested by the military. Okay, what's going on there? Well, Myanmar, right, used to be a British colony. It was called Burma under the rule of the British, and it got its independence. And there have been big divisions in the country about post-colonialism. What should it be? And there has been a military junta in power in Myanmar. The military of Myanmar is very pro-China. They're not socialists. They're not communists. They're not revolutionaries. They're nationalists, and they are inspired by Lee Kuan Yew, and they're inspired by Park Chung-hee in South Korea, and they're nationalistic bonapartists, the military. And because they want to make more money, basically, they're working in the economic interest of their country and of their ruling class faction. They think working with China is the best thing to do. And so the military of Myanmar has pivoted more or less, not totally. They sometimes they'll do business with the United States, but they see China as giving them a better deal economically, as giving them, better economic opportunities. So the military of Myanmar has pivoted closer to China. Not surprisingly, the United States is not too happy with that. The United States wants them to pivot closer to the United States. And so, in the early parts of the 21st century, we saw the United States government funding protests, etc., against the Myanmar military. And a lot of those protests were very justified. It's an autocratic state. It's a military government. People don't have freedom of speech and don't have freedom of assembly. And so a lot of folks in Myanmar who want freedom of speech and want freedom of assembly protested against the military. The United States kind of opportunistically supported those protests because they want to move Myanmar out of China's possession, out of being aligned with China. Petty investors and the left against financial capital. All right. And that's going on. And I actually have a funny story about that. So, the United States has been calling for Myanmar to open up, and be less of an authoritarian Bonapartist state where one wing of the ruling class, that being the military wing, has all the power, and open up. And the reason for this is not because the United States loves human rights or loves freedom or loves democracy. We know the USA loves Saudi Arabia, so that no. The USA loves brutal dictators like Pinochet. The USA backs all kinds of authoritarian, brutal, autocratic regimes around the world. So the USA is not concerned about human rights in Myanmar. They're concerned about the fact that the military government, and thank you, Andre, that the military government in Myanmar has taken a pro-China pivot. So under the Obama administration, there were some sanctions, there were some negotiations, and Myanmar started having more civilian rule. Why? Because the United States wanted to have more influence in Myanmar. Having a total RCP controlled opposition. Because having more openness in the government would mean that U.S. influence in Myanmar could expand, right? Under a total military junta where it's a Bonapartist regime, where there's one military faction that happens to be pro-China in power, the pro-U.S. forces are not going to have any influence. But if things open up, then U.S. influence can expand. So it seems like as Myanmar, under the Obama administration, opened up and had more civilian rule, the influence of the United States in Myanmar expanded. Well, now it seems that the military has re-seized control of the government. I don't endorse that. I believe in free elections. I believe in civilian rule. I'm not for what the military is doing. However, I'm telling you, the United States is against it, not because they care about human rights, but because the military of Myanmar is pro-China. Okay? The United States has been trying to build up pro-U.S. sentiments in Myanmar for a long time. And part of doing that has been opening up civilian rule, right? If the shoe was on the other foot, if the military of Myanmar was pro-U.S., they'd be calling for locking things down, right? This is what's going on here. The military of Myanmar, pro-China, comes out of that Asian tiger, Lee Kuan Yew tradition. They want like an autocratic kind of government that will be nationalistic and build up the economy. The United States wants an open international system, i.e., their influence there, weakening the country, neoliberalism, free markets, etc. Okay? That's really what's going on here. And that basically we're seeing the military. Now, the United States loves to divide and play ethnic groups against each other, and there's a whole situation with Muslims, etc., and that's going on there. And, the escalation against China internationally has really expanded. So the military, for their own selfish reasons, again, not endorsing this, I don't approve of overthrowing the civilian government, I'm just explaining what's going on here. The military of Myanmar, that is more pro-Chinese, has overthrown the elected government. Now, you'll notice, of course, the United States is condemning this because this is a military faction that they, I wanted to apologize for offending you the other night, for asking you what you did at the insurance company. You didn't offend me. It's fine. It's fine. Don't worry about it. But a faction of the military they don't like is in power. The United States is of course outraged, denouncing this, etc. But you'll notice in the statements from Joe Biden, and this is very, very important. Very important. This will explain to you what's actually going on here. In the statements from Joe Biden and from the White House, they repeatedly referred to Myanmar by its British colonial name. Burma does not exist. There is no country in the world at this time called Burma. There is no country in the world called Burma. Burma was wiped off the map, just like Rhodesia was wiped off the map, just like the Dutch East Indies was wiped off the map. Burma doesn't exist. Yet, the White House has been making statements about what's been going on in Myanmar and repeatedly saying Burma. And why? 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 This is a dog whistle. This is a dog whistle to the pro-British, pro-Western, anti-China factions in the country. Right? If the White House was talking about Zimbabwe and they said, yes, we're concerned about freedom in Rhodesia, everyone would know that was a dog whistle to the white supremacists and white farmers. If the White House was making a statement about the situation, in the Pacific region, and they started making references to the Dutch East Indies, everyone would know that was a dog whistle to certain factions. Well, the White House saying Burma in their statements about democracy, etc., Burma, 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 the reason they're doing that is they are sending a very clear dog whistle to the pro-Western, anti-China factions in the country, the factions that say everything was great under the British Empire, that hate China. It's sending a clear dog whistle to those people that the USA is on their side. Now, there's a big debate now. Should Joe Biden call it a coup in Burma or not? Well, the White House is probably being careful. They want to make a deal. They want to make a deal with the military. If they straight up call it a coup, then the USA can give no aid to Myanmar. You have to remember, under U.S. law, if it's legally declared a coup by the U.S. government, the U.S. government can give no aid. But you have to remember, the White House is saying to the military that's been in power in Myanmar, like, okay, guys, we don't approve of you. You were pro-Chinese. You overthrew the elected government. You're in power now. Now, you can do what we want and loosen it up, and then we can negotiate, or that's what's going on. This is a bargaining chip. If Joe Biden declares it a coup, all U.S. aid to Myanmar ends. If Joe Biden doesn't declare it a coup, the USA can still have some aid there. So there's negotiations going on about whether or not Biden will call it a coup. But that's basically what's going on in Myanmar. That's what's going on. And it's reflective a little bit of how much the international situation has changed. Look, during the Cold War, it used to be that the military bonapartist regimes were with the United States. We saw this over and over again, right around the world, in the Philippines, in Indonesia, in Chile, in country after country. There would be like South Korea, there'd be a bonapartist military state, that would be with the United States. And when those countries would open up and have free elections, the communists would get elected, or there'd start to be progressive reforms, and the United States would back the military in overthrowing the governments, right? The United States, didn't have popular support in South Korea. A lot of South Koreans hated the United States, didn't have popular support in Indonesia, didn't have popular support in a lot of South American countries. But the militaries were all trained by the United States. And so because of that, well, militaries were trained by the United States, and the elected governments got overthrown. Well, now things have started to change. You'll notice at the time of the fall of the Soviet Union, all of a sudden the United States started gradually trying to transition countries that had been brutal military dictatorships backed by the United States into open countries. Why? They didn't like the bonapartism, neoliberalism, Marxist versus liberal understanding of imperialism. Neoliberalism doesn't much care for these Bonapartist juntas. Why? Because in order to, and South Korea is a great example, right? Communist protests were happening in South Korea. North Korea was already socialist. The United States backed the dictator Park Chung-hee in South Korea. Well, in order for Park Chung-hee to stay in power as a military Bonapartist, the United States had to force Japan to loan all kinds of money to the government of South Korea. And under the leadership of Park Chung-hee, the government built the South Korean steel industry. They built POSCO. And the government built technology corporations. And the government, the military juntas, they're capitalist, they're Bonapartist capitalist regimes, but they engage in a lot of construction. In order to stay in power, they need to have a middle class that is loyal to the regime. And you saw that. You saw that in the Chile, in the Peronist governments in Argentina. You saw that throughout Latin America. These military juntas would be in power. And the military regimes, in order to stay in power, had to hand out some loot, right? They would brutally impoverish the people of the countryside, kill them, but then they would build a steel industry and build a government corporation here and subsidize these neighborhoods. And they would do stuff to secure their rule, right? Those regimes tended to not be very free market, and they were very careful about who could invest in the country. The military junta would pick, if this corporation can trade here, this corporation cannot, right? These were Bonapartist regimes, Bonapartism, the absolute rule of one faction of the ruling class. And when you have a military regime in a third world country, it's not very open. And the United States tolerated these military regimes because they were a barrier against communism. That was the understanding. Okay, Park Chung-hee will force Japan to give you money. We'll let you build up your own economy, but in exchange for that, you just have to kill all the commies. Okay, right? All right, we'll allow, this military junta here, in Indonesia. We'll allow this brutal regime in Indonesia, and they'll build some stuff here, but in exchange, you kill all the commies, right? And that went on. In the 80s, the first change was 1973. In Chile, you had Salvador Allende. It was an open society, meaning they had free elections, etc. Chile, they elected a socialist, Salvador Allende, who was in an alliance with the Communist Party and some other parties. CIA overthrows him. They bring Pinochet into power. The military takes over. But what made Pinochet different was that unlike Park Chung-hee in South Korea, unlike the government of Indonesia, unlike a lot of these military juntas the United States has backed all throughout the Cold War, he's not using the military to build up the Chilean economy. With Milton Friedman and the Chicago Boys, Pinochet demolishes the economy of Chile. He just demolishes it, right? He ends food subsidies. He ends subsidies and protections for domestic industries. Just demolishes the economy of Chile. Economic catastrophe, 30% unemployment, mass hunger and starvation. It was an economic disaster. Right? They implement all these policies. That was the first time neoliberal economics had ever really been put into practice, right? And so neoliberal economics is put into practice in Chile, completely wrecks the economy, just completely wrecks the economy. And so then, in the 80s, then the Pinochet regime starts backtracking. And in the 80s, they start renationalizing things, etc. But that was a turning point. And then later, after the fall of the Soviet Union, all across South South and Central America and in many countries where there's been a brutal U.S. military junta for a long time. Instead, the USA is starting to push open societies. Well, open societies, not only do they mean that there's competitive political parties and free elections, they also mean that there's free markets. And they also mean that tariffs are lifted. And the IMF and the World Bank, they start loaning countries money on the understanding that they will completely deregulate the market. And that's military juntas. The US-backed military bonapartist regimes don't generally do that, right? Military juntas, they're bonapartists. Well, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the USA says, why do we have to subsidize these military juntas that build their own industries and fund certain neighborhoods and we let the military decide what corporation gets to trade there? No, we're going to have free trade. And so, as the Cold War is coming to an end, U.S. imperialism transitions away from favoring Bonapartist military juntas to instead favoring free trade and what they call the Open Society. Read about the Open Society Institute of George Soros and others, right? That they want, instead of wanting an authoritarian state that will just beat down and kill the commies, what U.S. imperialism now wants is a pathetic, weak state that just rolls over and lets American corporations do whatever the hell they want. Right? It's a big change. During the Cold War, they wanted strong men and dictators to defeat the communist threat. And this time, they want weak, pathetic governments. Look, Guatemala, right? My wife's from Guatemala. Guatemala is a great example of a weak, pathetic government, right? Is Guatemala a dictatorship? No, I mean, they have free elections there. There's protests and stuff. Guatemala doesn't have a postal service because the government, couldn't find the money. It privatized. It sold the postal service off to a private company, and then they couldn't pay the bill. They don't even have a postal service, right? I mean, Honduras, right? Honduras, first when they overthrew Zelaya, it was a brutal authoritarian military state. Then they opened up, and they have elections now. But is Honduras, is that, I mean, look at it. The government of Honduras is weak and pathetic. The country's falling apart, and it's in a complete state of ruin, and it can't get anything done, right? Right? And that this new transition to having an open society, which means a weak, pathetic government that lets American capitalism do whatever the hell it wants, that is the model the imperialists are going for. Meanwhile, so then, right, this is where it gets weird, China increasingly takes the opposite position, right? China, the military junta in Myanmar, right? It says to them, hey, you want a stable society. You want Myanmar to get more prosperous. You don't want the neoliberal free market reforms that'll loot the country. So why don't we build you a railroad? Why don't we build you an airport? And China brings infrastructure, building up the state sector of developing countries, while the United States, deregulates and loots, wants that open international system. So it's a whole switch away from the Cold War, right? Now, I am for democratic rights. I am for human rights. I do not approve of what the generals did in Myanmar, but I'm telling you the geopolitics behind it, right? The section of the ruling class of Myanmar that is with the military and is more pro-Chinese has asserted power. The United States, that wants Myanmar to not be so pro-China, right? Myanmar, think about the South China Sea and access to the ocean. Think about geopolitics and everything going on in Asia. The United States, that is not very pro-China and is escalating things against China, they obviously don't approve of this faction. Now they're probably making a deal about whether they'll declare it to be a coup or whatever. That's what's going on in Myanmar. So this is happening all over the world. And we're going to see a lot more of this. When capitalism enters a state of crisis, you get Bonapartist struggles within the ruling class, right? And so, in the imperialists, their drive for global chaos, driving living standards down, instability and poverty throughout the whole world. Meanwhile, you have the Belt and Road and the Eurasian Economic Union coming out of Russia, and you have Bolivarianism, and you have all these, city-building forces that are trying to develop and raise people out of poverty. Thank you, I.O. Hillary. We're going to see clashes like this, right? For example, right, Modi in India, not a socialist, not a communist, not a progressive. Turkey, Erdogan, not a socialist, not a progressive. Duterte, at the beginning, he looked like he might be good. Now, it's pretty clear he's pretty awful. All three of those guys are Bonapartists. They represent one faction of the ruling class of their country, and and like Modi in India, he represents one faction of India's ruling class that might be slightly more nationalistic than the mainstream politicians. But at the end of the day, even though he's got kind of a nationalist edge, you'll notice that the Wall Street Journal and others have attacked him for over-regulating banking, and now he's imposing all kinds of crazy neoliberal reforms in India. Right? Talk about Erdogan. Erdogan, he's a strong figure, and he's associated with Muslims and such, and he negotiates. Sometimes he's closer to Russia, sometimes he's closer to the United States. He does what he thinks is in the interest of his faction in the ruling class of Turkey. You talk about Duterte again. Duterte seemed like he was more pro-China, he was more independent, and he might even be willing to work with the communists of the Philippines. Well, not anymore, right? Now, that didn't happen. So this is what's going on, right? As capitalism enters a state of crisis, there are more divisions. The pro-Chinese faction that's in with the Myanmar military has overthrown the government. The United States is throwing up its arms and just outraged because, how dare there be an unfree country in the world, when in reality what we know is they want Myanmar to simply have a weak government so they can economically loot the place. But are they right? Is this a violation of the democratic rights of the people of Myanmar? Absolutely, right? The elected government has been overthrown. The military is in power. That's not democracy. That's not freedom. So, it's important to not, I'm not going to defend what's happening, but I'm telling you the geopolitics behind it, right? You have to look at this in terms of geopolitics. That's what's happening. And this has been going on for a while. The United States has been disapproving of the military leadership of Myanmar for a long time because it is pro-China. And the Myanmar military leadership has been getting more and more pro-China, mainly because China builds things for them. They build railroads for them. They build airports for them. They build hospitals for them. And the Myanmar capitalists that are in with the Myanmar military, they say, oh, okay, all right, China's going to make us a better deal. We'll go with them. And that's in China's interest because they need to have a neighbor that is friendly to them, especially with access to the ocean. And why, it's not in the interest of the United States because the United States doesn't particularly like China and wants to economically isolate China and sees China as a competitor. That's what's going on. So funny story. So I was in college years ago. And when I was in college, out of nowhere, I think it was 2007, 2008, around that time, the military junta was in power in Myanmar, just like they are now. It was before the opening up that happened during the Obama years. Military junta is in power in Myanmar. All of a sudden, all over CNN, we're hearing about how the Buddhist monks of Myanmar are protesting, and the CNN anchors are like crying, oh, these Buddhist monks just want freedom. It's so beautiful. It's so, and of course, me being somebody who studies Marxism and all of that, right? Okay. Military regime and junta in Myanmar has certainly violated human rights, etc. But these Buddhist monks are clearly being supported by the U.S. government and the U.S. State Department, and their goal is to bring Myanmar away from China and closer to be aligned with the United States, right? So I'm studying among Marxists, and we basically just see that these Buddhist monks that are protesting in Myanmar, that are being cheered on New York Times and CNN and all the mainstream media, they're all clearly, being supported by the United States. Their goal is to bring Myanmar closer to the United States. So, we studied this as a Marxist organization, and we, in the political group I was in, we were anti-imperialists thoroughly. We studied it. We knew what was going on. So I'm at my college, and there's this professor at my college. And she is I won't say her name because she's probably still teaching somewhere. She may not be at the college I went to. She's a professor of religion. She is a Buddhist, and I never took one of her classes. Thank goodness. But she's a professor of religion. She's a Buddhist, but she's like a big supporter of Israel. She's like, her religion is Buddhism, but she's a huge supporter of Israel. And there were a lot of complaints about her classes, I remember. And a lot of those complaints weren't coming from a good place. I did sympathize with her a little bit because, evangelical Christians can be very sensitive when you're teaching them about religion, right? If they're teaching about the history of Christianity and you point out to them that, the Council of Nicaea voted on the books of the Bible, they'll just throw up their arms. No, the Bible's the word of God. How dare you say so? A lot of the complaints against her were coming from a bad place. So I kind of sympathized with her. She was a Buddhist, big supporter of Israel, but she was teaching religion to this, college that had a lot of evangelical Christians at it, which was not an easy thing to do, and constantly facing complaints. But one of the big complaints against her was that people would say, if you studied her class, you would take the class she gave on the history of Christianity, and you would learn all about how Christianity was great because it was influenced by Judaism. And then you would take her class on the history of Buddhism, and you would learn all about how Buddhism is great because it's a lot like Judaism. And then you would take her class on the history of Islam, and you learn about how Islam is really great because it's heavily influenced by Judaism. And people would say, like, she taught one class on the history of Judaism, but, it was, people had that complaint, which is kind of comical. But anyway, so she's there, and she's, a Buddhist and all of this. And so anyway, I went to some discussion group or something. I was at some discussion group and this woman walked in, right? And it's some Marxist discussion group, and or it's not a Marxist discussion group, it's some kind of progressive discussion group or something. And I'm with like 10 or 12 other students, right? And it's a campus discussion group. She walks in, and she's got this self-righteous look on her face. Everyone must come to this rally later today. We are going to light a candle in support of the monks of Myanmar that are struggling against the brutal military regime. And, it's going to be so self-righteous. And, and she's urging all of us to go protest, in line with CNN, right? CNN hates the government of Myanmar, and she's urging us to all go have just to repeat the words of the American empire, the evil pro-China military junta of Myanmar, etc. So, of course, I'm just sitting there. So afterwards, I went up to her and I said, well, I'm not sure I would be comfortable protesting against the government of Myanmar because it seems like these monks in Myanmar are very pro-American and pro-imperialist, and that it seems like they're not really concerned about human rights. They're just anti-China. Right? And I just, that was the orientation I've been given by the political party I was in, right? It was just, always be suspicious of any protest movement. It's being promoted by mainstream American capitalism. It's directed at the rivals of American imperialism. That was just kind of my orientation. Now, and people knew I had these views, right? I was on the campus. I would raise my hand and speak up about this kind of stuff. It was whatever. So, anyhow, so I'm in the class, and I raised, I went up to her afterwards. It wasn't even a class. It was like a discussion group. I went up to her after and said, well, I just gave her my view. This woman lost her mind. I mean, she lost her mind. She's like, this is not Iraq. And I'm like, I didn't say it was Iraq. This is not Iraq. This is a struggle for democracy. And I'm just like, okay, and she's just like, this, and then she said to me, which doesn't even make any sense. She said, even George Bush supports the monks of Myanmar. And I'm thinking, of course he does. He's the head of U.S. imperialism. She's like, even George Bush supports them. And I'm thinking, of course he does. Like, how is that an argument? And she just lost her mind. And she's sitting there like having a meltdown at me. And I realized, I'm standing there, I'm like, what in the world? Like, I realized at that moment that what was going on there was that on some level she probably knew what I was saying was right or something, right? And I've noticed that. It's always been a big pet peeve of mine. When people get all self-righteous when they repeat CNN. It annoys me like crazy. And this woman was all about that. Whatever the latest trendy international CNN social justice cause was, she was part of the Save Darfur organization. And I would see her and the Save Darfur people, and I would say to them, your organization wants sanctions on Darfur. That's going to prevent, medicine and food from getting in there. Won't that hurt people in Darfur? And isn't the main reason the USA is against the government of Sudan because they're friendly to China? Oh, she would lose her mind, right? Whatever the latest trendy cause was, Chavez is murdering the innocent Venezuelans, whatever the latest trendy international cause was. It's like, by listening to NPR religiously and then organizing little stupid protests around whoever NPR and CNN tell you to hate this week, She thought she was like being such an activist. And that always has pissed me off. It's really pissed me off when people do that, when they get all self-righteous, right? Like, oh, look at me. And yet, at the time, the USA was bombing Iraq, the USA had invaded Iraq, and I was always organizing protests against Iraq, but these people would never do it. Oh, no, they would never protest the U.S. crimes in Iraq. Their own government was occupying Iraq, murdering people. No protest against it. But, oh, NPR runs a violin story about monks in Myanmar, and it's like, oh, I'm going to light a candle. Look how self-righteous I am. Oh, I'm taking a stand. I'm heroic. Oh, and it's just, oh, I hate that. I hate that, right? There's nothing heroic about repeating what the mainstream media says. There's nothing heroic about it. There is absolutely nothing heroic about it. And, these people that get on there and they just mouth what the lying, murderous U.S. imperialists want them to say, right? U.S. government says, we're hating the government of Venezuela. And they're like, I hate the government of Venezuela. I'm such a hero. No, you're not. It's easy. It's easy to hate the government of Venezuela in the United States. It is easy to hate North Korea in the United States. It is easy to hate China or Russia in the United States. And I hate it when not only do these people... these people could be questioning authority, they could be exposing their lies, but oh no, that they repeat the lies of the imperialists, number one. And then number two, they act like they're so, I'm taking a stand for the monks of Myanmar. I'm standing up against, Fidel Castro and his brutal regime. Shut up. There's nothing heroic about it. You're a punk if you do that. You're a punk. And that woman who blew up at me in this meeting because I dared question whether or not she should be lighting a candle for the monks of Myanmar. She's a punk. At the end of the day, she's a punk. She's a coward. She's over-socialized, right? She would never take a stand if CNN wasn't on her side. She would never take a stand if the New York Times wasn't backing it up. She would never think critically of Western media. She's not a hero. She's not an activist. She's not a revolutionary. She's a punk. And I'm tired of punks. I'm really tired of punks. I'm really sick and tired of punks. I'm really tired of it, right? Take a stand for real. Question authority. Start questioning the lies that the imperialists tell. Start exposing the false narratives of the imperialists. Don't think you're a hero for repeating whatever the latest CNN talking point is. I'm so tired of that. I really am. So that Myanmar thing, right? That said, I don't endorse, the coup in Myanmar, but I'm telling you the geopolitics of it. And I'm just telling you what's going on there. So that's my little story. It reminded me of being in a college class with this professor and yeah, that was pretty wild. And the other thing about this professor is she was a very strong supporter of Israel, I remember. And on my campus, I remember one of the Palestinian students arranged for a screening of a pro-Palestine film on the campus. And she and the Hillel Club on my campus, which was very small, it was like 5 or 6 students that were in the Hillel Club, demanded the right to see the movie beforehand, right? And they watched it. And it was like they were not allowed to show this pro-Palestine film. It was considered to be anti-Semitic or something. But I think they did show the film, but it was like, this professor and the Hillel Club were just up in arms. How dare a pro-Palestine film be shown, Well, how dare she have her Saved Our Fur stuff and promote U.S. imperialism in Africa? How dare she, be promoting Tibet separatism and trying to break apart China? How dare she be lighting, candles and trying to, bring Myanmar back into the U.S. sphere of influence? How dare she be demonizing Venezuela or demonizing Cuba? Unbelievable. She would want to, it was a crime somehow. She and the other students in the Hillel Club. Oh, how dare! No student should be able to show a pro-Palestine film. And it's just the hypocrisy of these people. It's very, very extreme. So, these geopolitical issues are important to understand, and it's important to understand that. Look, the New York Times is not your friend. The Wall Street Journal is not your friend. CNN is not your friend, okay? NPR is not your friend. What the U.S. imperialists and their mouthpieces are promoting is generally opposed to our interests, okay? And you have to recognize that. You have to recognize that, okay? You don't recognize that, you're not really a socialist. You're not really a revolutionary. And it's a hard thing for people to get over, right? It's a hard thing for people to get their minds around. I told a certain person who shall not be named when I was debating him, I said there will never be a socialism that the New York Times approves of. And a lot of socialists have this in their mind. They have it in their mind that someday we're going to take power, and the New York Times will come and they'll inspect it. And they'll say, well, we don't agree with your socialism, but you're clearly a democratic country. You're clearly free, and we're not going to run, propaganda saying that you're a dictatorship. That'll never happen. That'll never happen. That will never happen. Anytime a country breaks out of Western capitalism, breaks out of imperialism, starts developing on its own, the U.S. imperialists are going to call it a dictatorship. They're going to call it a brutal regime. They're going to they're going to put sanctions on it. They're going to condemn it. They're going to wage a public relations campaign against it. They're going to try to invade it. They're going to try to overthrow it. Okay? I don't understand why that's so difficult for so many socialists to get. There will never be a socialist society that the American imperialist media is going to say, all right, it's democratic. They won't do that. I mean, it's the problem in the socialist movement. I've said this many times, is that there are so many people in the socialist movement that will only follow people who lost. Rosa Luxemburg, they can follow her. She lost. Right? Trotsky, they can follow Trotsky. He lost. He lost out. Right? They can follow the anarchists of Spain. Why? They lost. Right? I mean, all you have to do, if you want to be loved by the synthetic left, lose. Just lose. You lose, it's okay to like you. But if you actually take power, you actually start building socialism, inevitably the U.S. imperialists are going to print a whole bunch of nasty lies about you. And they're going to, they might, mix a lot of truth in with those lies. And they'll demonize you, and they'll put sanctions on you. And if you're going to stay in power, you're going to have to, get firm, and the government's going to have to defend itself, and you're going to have to suppress elements in the country that are trying to overthrow socialism. And, these middle-class synthetic leftists, they don't want to be associated with that. They don't want to get their hands dirty. So they only follow socialists who lose. Well, if you want to lose, follow socialists who lose. By all means, right? If you want to lose, follow socialists who lose. But if you actually want to see a socialist society, follow socialists who win. That's my advice to you. If you actually want to see a socialist society, don't find some socialist from the past who lost and say, if only Rosa Luxemburg, if only Trotsky had been in charge of the Soviet Union, if only the anarchists of Spain had taken... Don't do that. Because all you're going to learn from that is you're going to learn to cry, you're going to learn to be pessimistic, and all of that. Instead, read William C. Foster. Read about what the Communist Party that was aligned with the Soviet Union had to say. Look at what China is doing today. Look at what Venezuela is doing today. Look at what Cuba has done. Read about and learn from those who won. All right. Trump to USSR. Read about and learn from people who actually won. That is my advice to you. Right? That is my advice to you. And stop looking for the one true ideology, right? It's not the way it works. Some people that are like, if only every socialist country had adopted the teachings of Enver Hoxha. No. Right? If only every socialist country had been like Stalin's Russia was in the 1930s and just stayed that way. No. Right? Stop that. Right? That's not dialectical. That's not understanding how the world works. Socialism is different in every country. Socialism in every country evolves and adapts and changes over time. So I'm urging you to stop seeing this like a religion. Ramiro's in there. He said, if only they had just said the magic words. Exactly. This isn't a religion, folks. If you want religion, if you want the one true path to save your soul, become a Christian, become a Muslim, become an Orthodox or religious Jew, become a Buddhist. I'm not here to save your soul, folks. I'm not. Religion is a very personal thing. It's your own personal path to go on. I am talking about how we can transition the United States and the world to a society where profits are not in command. That's what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in finding the one true path to salvation. So if you're going to start looking at communism, if only we could adopt the one true magical path, that's not Marxism. You have left Marxism at that point. You're talking about religion. You're talking about something else. So that's my point on that. A couple other things I wanted to to mention before we get to our discussion tonight. Saturday Night Live, okay? So, a long time ago, when Saturday Night Live first started in the 70s, it was kind of a cutting edge liberal show, right? It was kind of critical of imperialism. You know, they had episodes where they would like bash Pinochet and stuff. And, you know, it was kind of considered like a hippie, anti government, anti system show. They had a character who had a cigarette at one point. I forget his name, and he was like this evil corporate lawyer who would smoke a cigarette and be like, "What's your point? What's your point?" Right? And he was supposed to be this right-wing corporate lawyer, and you know, but then like 90s especially, SNL just became, I mean, I don't know, you know, Will Ferrell was skilled. I mean, Will Ferrell was very good at kind of lampooning the middle class, right? And I say Will Ferrell, you know, Will Ferrell's comedy, it wasn't political. He wasn't making political statements, but he was kind of lampooning how angry a lot of middle class people are and how unhappy they are, right? And that especially among like upper middle class people, his comedy is not. It's not directed at it's very, you know, I hate to, I'm going to sound like a rad lib here, but I mean, his comedy is very white, right? It's very suburban. But if you watch it, you know, if you watch like Dysfunctional Family Dinner, Get Off the Shed, you know, some of his comedy sketches, it's kind of making fun of how angry and unhappy people in the middle class are, despite pretending they're happy, right? And that I appreciate that. That's saying something, okay? It's saying something, right? I mean, it's a statement. It's kind of a mild condemnation of the society and alienation, but it's not overtly political. Abolishing prisons. It's not overtly political, right? And especially when Will Ferrell started doing his impression of George W. Bush, it was awful because it wasn't political. I mean, it was like he's doing an impression of the president of the United States, and it's like the president of the United States is bad because he's a buffoon or something. There was no politics in his George W. Bush impression. So, but especially in the 90s, Saturday Night Live was kind of gross. It was just kind of, you know, and every so often there'd be some really like nasty, they would make fun of low-income people. There'd be digs at poor people. There would be, I mean, it got kind of nasty, right? So I noticed around the time that around the time that Trump got elected, Saturday Night Live started, it got a little smarter. Got a little bit smarter. Got a little smarter, and it was kind of commenting, it was kind of like The Onion. Like it's commenting on trends in U.S. society, right? They had a very funny sketch of like a group of teenagers put on a theatrical performance they think is woke, and it's hilarious. That's really funny. They had a comedy sketch, you know, and they're commenting on different trends in American society, right? 2016, 2017, right? And it's a little bit, you know, it's a little bit more sophisticated. And I'm watching this and I'm like, oh, okay, they're a little bit more cutting edge. So, folks, of course, you know, and every time there's a presidential debate, they do a spoof of it. And I noticed in this last election, Saturday Night Live was not funny at all. It was just not funny at all. Not funny at all. I mean, it was like, you know, their mockery. The debates were gold. That first debate between Trump and Biden was comedy gold. It was like a gift on a silver platter to any comedian, but they didn't make it funny. And I was like, how are they not able to make a joke? It was like they're scared, right? You talk about like a totalitarian state or something where it's like they're afraid to make a joke that'll offend the ruling class or something. It was weird, right? Like the 2020 elections, Saturday Night Live, it was like they weren't funny. They were afraid of making a joke, right? And the whole joke, they did the joke, the vice presidential debate, the whole joke was the fly, you know? And they kept doing this like Kamala Harris is your drunk aunt or something. I mean, it was like they couldn't be funny. It was really bizarre. So, first of the year comes, right? First Saturday Night Live of the new year comes. Finally, the first Saturday Night Live since the Capitol arrest. And of course, I'm watching this on YouTube. I don't watch it on my television, but I'm watching it on YouTube. That was disturbing. That was a disturbing, you know, I thought Saturday Night Live was not funny during the Trump election. It was kind of like, how are they not making this funny? This whole election is comedy gold. We got, you know, senile Joe Biden, and we got Trump the buffoon, and like, it could have been. And then their latest SNL was very, 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 like, it was not only not funny, it was kind of scary. There is a sketch that aired Saturday night, last Saturday on Saturday Night Live, that was not funny, and it was scary as hell. And the sketch is there's like 4 families in a house, and they're getting ready to play a board game. And then the FBI breaks in and arrests one of them for being part of the Capitol protests. And so after that, they start playing their board game again. Then the FBI comes in and arrests another one of them and dragging them away. Then the FBI comes in and arrests another one of them and drags them away. And there's only two people left. And the whole time when the FBI is dragging these people away, I mean, this is not funny at all. The FBI is dragging these people away, and they're saying, "Oh, I had no idea that Joe Bob was a QAnon protester. Oh, wow." They're not objecting to their family member, their relative, their neighbor being dragged away by the government. They're not objecting to it. They're saying, "Wow, I didn't know he was a bad guy. Wow, I didn't know he was a dissident. Wow, you never know who could be one of the crazy people running through the Capitol." It was utterly terrifying, right? This guy is being dragged out by the FBI for being part of the protest, and they're not going, "Why are you dragging our friend away?" They're going, "Oh, we didn't know he was a bad guy." It was absolutely terrifying. All right. Isolationist libertarians. It was utterly terrifying. Utterly terrifying. I mean, it was just utterly terrifying. I was sitting there and I was like, is this for real? Like, this is supposed to be a comedy sketch? That basically they're sending the memo like, hey, the government may come drag away your neighbor. The government may come drag away your relative or something. And isn't it funny that anybody can be one of those bad people who doesn't go along with the status quo? I mean, it was utterly terrifying. Utterly terrifying. Not funny at all. It actually reminded me. There's like an old, it's on YouTube, you can watch. There's a documentary called Nazi Humor. It's about the jokes that people made in the Third Reich when they were living under the Hitler regime. People would make jokes about the Hitler regime, right, and what it was like. Here's a joke. This is a joke that was quite popular in the Third Reich. And it basically was the same as what I saw on Saturday Night Live. This is the joke. You ready? Here's the joke. All right, the joke is that there's a guy and he's in a bar, and he sees a friend that he hasn't seen for a long time. And he sees his friend and he says to him, hey, where you been? I haven't seen you in a long time. And he says, that's because I was in a concentration camp. And the guy says, wow, you were in a concentration camp? And he says, yes, it was amazing, the concentration camp. I got to go water skiing and hiking in the woods, and I got to, play cards with my friend. It was amazing. It was amazing. The concentration camp was just an amazing experience. The guy says, really? He says, because, I talked to another guy who was in a concentration camp. Our old friend Steve, he was in a concentration camp. And he told me that it was awful. He told me that, that you were worked constantly, you didn't have enough food, they tortured people, they shot people sometimes randomly. It was just awful. He said it was awful. And the friend says to him, he says, well, obviously your friend was lying to you. He loved it so much, he went back. That's not funny. That is not a funny joke. But that's the way Germans kind of laughed about what was happening around them. It's eerie, right? And and many people talked about the Third Reich in the Nazi regime, a way that they kind of got people used to the fact that their relatives were disappearing was they kind of made it into a joke. If you can get people to laugh about something, you can kind of normalize it, right? And I've noticed this is a weird, eerie trend in movies. I noticed this. For example, that movies, television start kind of making light of people going to prison, right? That people going to prison isn't a big deal. Well, it's a pretty big deal. People going to prison in the United States is a pretty big deal, right? Going to prison in the United States is not a joke, not a friendly thing. It's a very big deal. It's a horrendous thing. If you know anyone who's ever been in prison, if you've gone and visited somebody in prison, not a joke. It's a big deal. They talk about in federal prison. When people go to federal prison, the first month they're in solitary confinement just to break them, right? It's awful, right? So, but you watch TV and movies, right? They make a lot of TV shows and movies that are almost about trying to kind of normalize it, make light of it. People go to prison. It's not a big deal. There'll be a sitcom that they'll show on Netflix or something, and there'll be somebody in the family just got out of prison. See, her sister went to prison. People go to prison. It happens. It is scary. How should leftists approach the issue of trauma? Leftism. It's eerie. There's a movie, I went, a couple years back, I saw a movie with my wife. We went to the movies. There's a movie theater in my neighborhood. They get every, very, bad movie that comes out. They don't get, good movies. They get, run-of-the-mill B movies, comedies. So there's a movie with Will Ferrell, where Will Ferrell is supposed to play this wealthy stock trader. Can't remember the name of the movie. He plays like a wealthy stock trader who's going to go to jail for insider trading. So he hires this person who is black to prepare him to go to prison. And the joke is this black friend of his has never actually been to prison, right? But the Wall Street stock trader is racist and assumes that because the guy's black, he's been to prison. And it's supposed to be, the guy's hustling his white friend or whatever. It's a movie. I forget the name of it. Get Hard is the name of it. Very good. And this wealthy white man is terrified of going to prison for good reason. Any person would be terrified of going to prison. Anyway, he's terrified of going to prison. He's getting hustled, by this guy who's supposed to be training him for what prison is like, etc. And at the end of the movie, he ends up, holding an illegal gun or whatever, and he ends up going to prison for 6 months. And the way the movie ends with Will Ferrell, the guy going to prison, it makes it sound like somehow this is okay. And he's like, oh, I got 6 months for having an illegal gun. And it ends with he's in prison, he's waking up in prison, but it's all okay. And then he gets out of prison, and it's no, it's not okay when someone goes to prison. That's a horrendous experience. But they've been subtly trying to get us to believe that, hey, people go to jail, people disappear, the FBI drags people out of their homes. That happens. Don't worry about that too much, right? Aren't you surprised that someone's a bad person? This person who's a good person, who's your friend, who's your neighbor, turned out to be a bad person the government had to drag away? Isn't that a surprise? Wow. It's eerie. They are getting ready for some kind of very scary totalitarian crackdown. And I don't think it's going to happen all at once. It's gradual. But look, I have said many times, the United States, we are in a capitalist crisis, and in a capitalist crisis, sections of the ruling class start fighting with each other. And as they start fighting with each other, they want a more authoritarian state to try and stabilize the crisis. The United States is really, really unstable right now, and they are trying to figure out how to stabilize it. How can they stabilize it? And again, like I've always said, bonapartism, one section of the ruling class fights another section of the ruling class. All the capitalists want the chaos and instability to end. They just want the other capitalists to be the ones to pay for it. There are different factions. There's the Eastern establishment. There's the Trump wing and the weapons manufacturers. There's the intelligence apparatus and the Pentagon. There are different factions within our ruling class. Okay? And it seems like as the capitalist crisis continues, they are fighting amongst themselves. But what I saw on Saturday Night Live 2 nights ago was very, very, very unfunny. Number one, it wasn't funny, right? In all the sketches, very little of the sketches were funny. There was a line here or there that I thought was funny, but overall, I didn't find the thing to be funny. But second of all, it was very, very, very much like it was trying to get people psyched up for the idea, we're going to be dragging away your friends and neighbors. We're going to be having a more authoritarian fascist state. We're going to see people, and, that's just, it's part of the way things are going. So just accept it, learn to laugh at it. Very scary, folks. Very scary. Like I said, I opened this live by saying I'm very, very happy to be alive right now. We are so lucky to be living in the times that we're living in. We are the generation that's going to see a socialist America, right? I believe it. You Zoomers are even more lucky than I am. But, this is late stage capitalism. These are the last days. These are the last days, right? Repeat that to yourself. These are the last days, because these are the last days. We are living in the last days of American capitalism and imperialism. Right? This is the death agony of the system. These are the last days. But I'm telling you that, things get worse before they get better. And there are some hard times on the horizon. And the work that we do as real, genuine anti-imperialist socialists, those of us who represent the city-building tendency of human history, right? The work that we do is going to be so, so important. So if you are not involved with the Center for Political Innovation, send me a message. Send me a message, because the work that we are doing in bringing back real socialism, awakening the optimistic and hopeful side of the American people is so important in this time. It's so, so important in this time. It is highly, highly important in this time. We are heading towards the last days, and that's something we all just have to recognize. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. More than ever, we need a government of action that will fight for working families. And those of us who realize that have a responsibility in these times. So I promised you I was going to read to you from William Z. Foster. And I'm going to read to you what William Z. Foster said, because we have to be responsible. Advocating a violent revolution is not responsible. Communists never advocate violence, right? It is always the capitalists who force violent revolutions to happen by cracking down on people's democratic rights, by imposing fascism and such. So I am going to read to you William Z. Foster. This a personal friend of Mao, met with Stalin many times, leader of the Communist Party during the 1930s, this supporter of the Black Belt South, the left or right, do you think the left and right will support it? What is it? What do you mean by it? Left. But I'm going to read to you what he said about what communists should advocate. What communists should advocate and what they should not advocate. So I'm just going to read to you. This is, and again, if you think William Z. Foster was a revisionist, wasn't a real revolutionary, that's for you to think. But this man, U.S. empire do something catastrophic in its decline. I'm going to read to you what the greatest American Marxist, the leader of the American Communist Party, during its period of great strength, this is what he said about how communists in the United States should organize, what they should advocate. It's from his book, The Twilight of World Capitalism, 1949. In order for the people to put the United States firmly on the path toward peace, democracy, and general well-being, the power of the monopolists who dominate our country must be curbed and finally broken, and the people themselves must take political charge under the leadership of the working class. The struggle for socialism grows inevitably out of the everyday fight of the workers and their allies, especially against the present menaces of economic chaos, fascism, and war. In all good time, the American people, on the basis of their existing conditions, will decide how and in what forms they will introduce socialism. The way our party foresees the possible development of the future is along the following general lines. First, we propose the regular election of a democratic coalition government based on a united front combination of workers, small farmers, black people, professionals, small business groups, and other democratic elements who are ready to fight against monopoly, economic breakdown, fascism, and war. This type of united front government could well have behind it the overwhelming majority of the people, and as it has in other lands. It goes without saying that the election of such a democratic government could only be brought about in the face of powerful and very surely violent opposition from organized reaction. The whole history of the American class struggle, which is full of examples of employer violence in strikes and in other mass struggles, teaches this lesson with unmistakable clarity. The bitter attacks made against the Progressive Party, led by Henry Wallace during the 1948 elections, gave a sure indication of the frenzy and desperation with which the capitalists would confront a People's Front combination that was strong enough to actually threaten their control of Congress and the presidency. Obviously, it would be an extremely difficult proposition to truly elect a democratic government in the face of this strong, violent, and reactionary opposition. Second, our party contends that such an anti-fascist, anti-war democratic coalition government, once in power, would be compelled either to move to the left or die. With state power in its hands, it would be forced to pass from the more or less defensive program upon which it was elected to an offensive program. Confronted with the sabotage and open resistance of big business, it would have no other alternative than this if it hoped to realize any progressive legislation of its program and to ensure staying in power. A people's government would be forced to proceed directly and undermine the power of big monopolies by adopting far-reaching policies of nationalization of big banks and major industries. The breakup of the big landlords, the beginnings of a planned economy, and the elimination of reactionary elements from control of the army, the schools, and the industry, as well as various other measures to weaken monopoly and strengthen the working class as the leading progressive force in the nation. Third, a democratic, anti-fascist, anti-war government under the violent attacks of capitalists in its efforts to find solutions to burning economic and political problems, if it were to survive, would necessarily move leftward towards socialism, much as the people's democracies of Eastern Europe and Central Europe are now doing. Some liberals believe that a united front coalition government in this country would introduce a regime of progressive capitalism, but this is a naive and dangerous illusion. Capitalism is now in its monopoly stage and is hopelessly reactionary. Any people's government in our times, in order to be progressive or even to live, inevitably must move towards socialism. American socialism, beyond question, will have its own specific forms and methods, but basically it will be the same as socialism in other countries, with monopoly capitalism completely defeated, the industries and natural resources in the hands of the people, production for general use instead of profit, and the working class as the leader of the whole people. Only in this way will this country and the world finally be freed from the dangers of poverty, economic chaos, fascist slavery, and murderous war. These steps could be taken by a people's government, notwithstanding the opposition of the capitalists, however violent. To promote the election of a progressive coalition government of this type, which by force of circumstances would move to the left and eventually to socialism, on the general pattern of Eastern people's democracies, is obviously not to advocate a program of force and violence. The enemies of the Communist Party, to the contrary, notwithstanding. The charge by the Department of Justice that our party advocates the forcible overthrow of the government is a brazen and conscious lie. The plain fact of the matter is that the communist movement in this country, as well as abroad, since the Seventh World Congress in 1935, has been going along on the practical working theory that in this period, because of the broad mass struggle against fascism and war, it has become possible in a whole number of democratic countries, including the United States, legally to elect democratic governments which could, by curbing and defeating capitalist violence, orient themselves in the direction of building socialism. Is it possible to elect such a democratic coalition, anti-monopoly government in the United States, the stronghold of world capitalism? It is a sinister fact that the civil rights in this country, notably since the end of the war, have been seriously whittled away. But the United States is by no means at the stage of fascism. He's writing this in the middle of McCarthyism. Nor do we communists consider American fascism to be inevitable. The big popular upsurge in recent presidential elections was a dramatic justification of our faith in the democratic strength of the American people. It showed a profound anti-fascist, anti-war sentiment among the masses. In the end of an economic crisis or a war, this mass democratic upsurge would be vastly greater and more clear-sighted. Our party's political line is based on the assumption that it is possible, under the present political conditions in the United States, for the broad masses of people, militantly led by trade unions and a strong mass political party, to elect a coalition anti-monopoly government. How long this possibility may last in the face of fascist trends in this country is problematical. But if we should get fascism, if the United States were reduced to the level of fascist Spain, then the communists will know how to reshape their policies to meet that kind of situation. It may well be asked, what resistance will American capitalism be able to make when the great masses of people finally decide, as they surely will, to establish socialism? Today, American capitalism is strong, but it is not as strong as it appears to be, nor has it got the permanent lien on its present strength. Now it is true, Wall Street is the world bully and is busy trying to organize civil wars in various countries to arm itself and other capitalist countries for another world war. But what will its power of resistance to socialism be when, as may be likely, the vast bulk of the rest of the world has gone to socialism, when its own foreign markets have largely dried up, when it is undermined by economic crisis? Sorry, this is making me emotional. When it may have just about wrecked itself by its projected world war, and when the working class has developed Marxist-Leninist ideology and set out to bring about socialism. It may well turn out that it will be far easier for the American working class in the midst of a socialist world to establish socialism in this country than now appears to be the case, with American capitalism at the peak of its strength. Who can foretell such things? Certainly, we Marxist-Leninists do not engage in prophecy. Wow. Folks, he was talking about right now. He was talking about the times that we are living in. This book was written in 1949. And in 1949, he predicted the very moment that we are living in right now. I am going to read you exactly the sentences that this is shocking to me, right? He's saying, these people say communist revolution could never happen in the United States. I mean, he's literally talking about if the circumstances that are starting to unfold in this country at this very moment were happening, there could be a socialism. Right? He's saying, but what will its power to resist socialism be? When the vast bulk of the rest of the world has gone socialist. Look what's happening with the Belt and Road Initiative. When its own foreign markets have dried up. Look at what's going on right now. When it is undermined by economic crisis. Hello. When it may have just wrecked itself by its projected world war. And then the last part, our job. When its working class has developed a Marxist-Leninist ideology and sets out to bring about socialism. It may well turn out that it will be far easier for the American working class in the midst of a socialist world to establish socialism in this country than it now appears to be the case with American capitalism at its peak. This is, he's talking about right now, folks, when the foreign markets have dried up, when the rest of the world is moving towards socialism. He's talking about right now. This is utterly amazing, right? I've told you all before, we are living in the last days of American capitalism. And what SNL is psyching us up for with their fascist crackdown, the reason that there have been so many vicious attacks on me for daring to try and teach Marxist-Leninist ideology and teach what socialism actually means, which is not, I gotta start a cooperative in the woods and we all share the profits from my pencil factory, is because it's happening. We are living in the last days of American capitalism. It's happening. The circumstances that William Z. Foster predicted that socialism could come to the United States are happening at this moment, right? They have lost control of the international markets. The crisis is here. The rest of the world is moving towards socialism. China's economy has outstripped the United States. Countries like Vietnam are surging ahead. It's happening. We are living in the last days of American capitalism. This book that William Z. Foster wrote in 1949, beautiful book, by the way, The Twilight of World Capitalism. And he's writing this amid McCarthyism. He writes this at a time where people were in federal prison for being communists, where it was illegal to be a member of the Communist Party. He writes this book. It's worth reading. I don't agree with everything in here. A lot of the stuff he says about, you can read it for yourself. I'm not going to totally review the book, but the dedication of the book. He dedicates the book to my great-grandson, Joseph Manley Kolko, who will live in a communist United States. Seriously. This is beautiful stuff, folks. Remind yourself over the next week or 2 weeks or the next year. We are very lucky to be alive in the time that we are living right now, because we are living in the last days of American capitalism. And the future, as awful as things look in our time, the future is looking up. The circumstances are getting ready. The world's appetite for what we have to offer, is becoming stronger and stronger and stronger. But only we can do it. Only we can do it. We can't count on anybody else to do it. There's a reason we have to do what we're going to do. All right, I missed some super chats, so let me go back and find these super chats I missed. Does racism influence modern anti-China sentiments? All right. Racism influence modern anti-China sentiments. Right, what else we got here? Does racism influence modern anti-China sentiments? What else we got? I want to make sure everyone will the left and right support throwing peaceful protesters and conspiracy theorists in prison. Okay. Prison. Protests. All right. Keep going. Okay. I think I got everything. All right. Okay. Alrighty. Okie dokie, folks. Bless your heart, Maupin. Well, thank you. I'm doing the best I can. So, we've got a long road ahead of us, but these are, hey, folks, so why don't we do our roll call, and I'll call you out as I see you, names and locations. Names and locations, I'll call you out as I see you. Who's with us tonight? Who is with us? And from there, we'll do the super chats. Arctic Angel in Norway, Kendall in San Diego, Albany, New York, Bendigo, Australia. Should we oppose liberals oppressing the far right? All right, oppose liberals oppressing the far right. All righty. Los Angeles, West Palm Beach, Bendigo, Australia, David Fox, David in China, West Palm Beach, Brazil, San Diego, Adelaide, Australia. Juan from Mexico. Nassau County, Char Char Darling. Zoomer in St. Louis, Missouri. Illinois, Cincinnati, Ohio. Crizzy Cruz from Glendale, California. John in Houston, Montreal. Long Island, New York. West Palm Beach. Jeff in Los Angeles. San Miguel Allende in Mexico. Northern California. West Palm Beach. Ramiro and Ophelia in East LA. Shout out to you guys. Great stuff. Denver, Colorado. Brisbane, Australia. Jeff in Grand Canyon National Park. Wow, are they open? Incheon, Korea. San Jose. Pomona in California. Massachusetts. Toronto, Canada. Cleveland. Toronto, Canada. Silicon Valley. Frank Naha. Nakia, Wisconsin, Australia. David and Jaron from Michigan. Welcome. Long live from socialist Beijing. Greece. Tom in Pennsylvania. Sham, Cleveland Wasteland. Forsyth, Missouri. Valpo, somewhere, Georgia. Bayonne, New Jersey. Cincinnati, Ohio. Lockport, New York. Soccerfield from Florida, Missouri. Kieran from Toronto. Sydney, Australia, Russia, the Netherlands, Miguel, Puerto Rico, Billings, Montana, St. Bermuda, Alberta, Canada, Chicago, Glendale, California, Mashhad, Iran, Nate from Sydney, Australia, Manhattan, Melbourne, Australia. A lot of folks from Australia tonight. Great stuff. Albany, New York, Fairhope, Alabama. Who else is with us? Amy from Indiana, very good. Leipzig, East Germany. Portugal. Long live the memory of William Z. Foster. Absolutely. Chicago, very good. Chicago's a great city. Washington State, amazing, right? Very, very good. Very good. Austin from Idaho. Australia. It's afternoon in Australia. Well, good afternoon to all of you. Anybody else? Names and locations before we move on to these super chats. What else is new? Anybody else before I move on? Thailand. Someone from Thailand. Australian comrades. David Fox. Rick from the land that time forgot. Isn't that a movie? Seattle. Occupied South Korea. Death Valley. Oh, wow. A little deep there. Grand Canyon National Park is still open. Very good. Caracas, Venezuela. Bay Area, California. Love to get out to the Bay Area. Chris Baldwin in Park, California. Thailand. Will Balthazar in Oakland. Pour some more unnamed diet beverage. What else? Who else is here with us? Balthazar in Oakland. Ireland. We got folks in Ireland. Very, very good. Very good. Anybody else? Alrighty. Okie dokie. All right. First super chat question. Jason and I fighting. We're not fighting. I'm not fighting with him. He can fight with me all he wants. I'm not fighting with him. I mean, look, I started to watch some of the video and I'm just like, this is dumb. And I just, whatever. I mean, I don't know why he made that video. I don't know what he thinks he gets out of that or gains from it, but whatever. I don't care. I've got a lot of other things to worry about. I like Jason. I respect the work that he does. I think he's a good guy. That he's doing a lot of good work. And, I watched it and it's just, whatever, I want to give American workers more stuff. You bet I do. As American workers are losing their jobs and homes, I want them to be more prosperous. Guilty as charged. I think that growth is unlimited. Yep. I think we can get to communism. That requires growth, right? Stateless, classless world requires growth. If he wants to, whatever, I'm over this. I'm really over this, right? I'm over this. I think he does good work, Jason. He's anti-imperialist. He exposes the crimes of imperialism. He does good work on Press TV, speaking out. So whatever. I don't know what motivated him to think he was going to gain something by making that video, but I didn't even watch the whole thing. Honestly, I started watching it and I'm like, oh boy, here we go. I'm a white settler colonialist. Oh boy, you got me. I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed that he did that, but I don't, in all the scale of things, I don't care. And I still think Jason's a great guy and we don't agree. He's anti-China. I'm pro-China. He's a third worldist. I reject third worldism. we don't see eye to eye. That's pretty obvious if you watch our content. So, whatever. And I'm sure he'll still make some other great videos, and that's that. All right. What do I think of Althusser, Badiou, and Zizek? Well, those are three very different individuals. Louis Althusser was the French Communist Party's philosopher. He was a philosopher in France, was leader of the French Communist Party. I will be honest, I studied some of his work in college because he, in the time I was in college, there was this whole all of a sudden there was this new interest in Marxism. So you had BBC promoting Badiou and stuff like that. And so I studied some Althusser. He's a little bit strange. Althusser, I guess he was not well psychologically. He killed his wife. He was having kind of psychological problems, and he was hallucinating and killed his wife. And he was into the philosophical side of Marxism. And it's just, I could never really get into Althusser's writings. I know that he's been a very important philosopher for many people. Alain Badiou, I know more about. Alain Badiou is the idea of communism guy, right? His whole thing is he argues that, communism, while there is the Marxist understanding, there is part of the American spirit that strives for communism, going back to the slave revolts of Spartacus, and the utopian writings of Thomas More and others, and that's correct. I don't disagree with that. He argues that the Paris Commune and the First International and the Shanghai Commune during the Cultural Revolution in China are the only two examples we should go to. We should throw every other socialist, country out. I don't agree with that. He comes out of the Maoist movement, and he takes things in kind of a strange idea, but, he's interesting. I remember Alain Badiou. Slavoj Žižek. I did see Slavoj Žižek's film, The Pervert's Guide to Ideology, where it's he shows clips from movies and he talks about them and he gives kind of a Marxian analysis of those movies. And what I thought was interesting was, overall, I didn't agree with the conclusion of his film where he said that, the 20th century showed that communism, only made things worse or what. I didn't agree with that. What I thought was interesting was that there were a couple little tidbits of analysis in the film that was actually rather profound. And said some things that point to some rather tanky conclusions. For example, one of the things he pointed out was that at the time of in Eastern Europe, part of the way that they were able to kind of deconstruct the psychology of the socialist countries was by having comedy shows that kind of made fun of ordinary people and presented ordinary people as being stupid. And he talks about how this deconstructed the mythology of the people that was the basis of the socialist states. I think that's fascinating, right? That basically by having comedy that showed everyday people to be kind of stupid buffoons, they were able to kind of set the stage for the color revolutions. That's fascinating to me. Another thing that he talked about was how the Prague Spring, and he talks about how it's romanticized because it was crushed. And how if the Prague Spring had been victorious, if it had continued, either there would have been a brutal crackdown on it, or it would have led to free market neoliberal capitalism. And the reason people romanticize the 1968 uprising of the Prague Spring is because it didn't win. So it became a fantasy in people's heads. Now, again, that also points to the fact of, what I've said, right? People don't remember the color revolutions of Eastern Europe so well because what did they lead to? But the Prague Spring, they lost, so people can romanticize it. That is very interesting. There were some interesting observations there. Underneath his overall, kind of anti-communist Marxian Freudian analysis, there were some little tidbits of rather profound points that kind of deconstruct his overall narrative. And when he's talking about American movies, he just shows the capitalism of them. So I'm not a huge Zizek fan. I find a lot of his work it's very highfalutin. He wrote a book called On Violence, and he spends hundreds of pages explaining that in addition to violence and terrorism in everyday life, there's also state violence. No shit. And a lot of Zizek's writings, I look at it and I'm like, no shit, Sherlock. It's just kind of it's really basic Noam Chomsky observations about American capitalism. American capitalism kills people too, not just anti-imperialist states. No shit, right? It's kind of and it's why is this being presented as the most profound but then he's mass marketed, and so whatever. I mean, whatever. I don't, I mean, if Slavoj Žižek invited me to debate him or appear on a panel with him, I would say yes. So there you go. Same for Badu. I can't appear with Althusser because he died, but I would do it, right? There's no reason to make enemies out of all these people, right? I don't agree with Zizek on a lot of points. I don't agree with Badu on a lot of points. I don't agree with many people on a lot of points, but, do they have something interesting to put forward? That should be the analysis. It's one thing that people talk about, the expression, the phrase kindergarten communism. We ought to popularize that, kindergarten communism, because people get into this this level of analysis. It's very primitive, especially when people are first discovering Marxism and communism. When someone's in kindergarten, they learn the colors, right? That's red, that's purple, that's green. They learn the letters H, Z, Q, right? They learn the fruits, apple, banana, right? And that what I call kindergarten communism is when people, their analysis is they start pointing at things. That's capitalist, that's socialist, and then somebody like Zizek comes along and they're like, that's not the party line. This is the true Marxist-Leninist line. This is not. Good for you. I mean, just like learning to put labels on things is not profound, right? I mean, Zizek. Is Zizek a revolutionary communist? Nope. Is he a revolutionary Marxist? Nope. Is he, going to lead the United States towards socialism? Nope. But just saying that in and of itself is not profound, right? That's like saying this is an apple, this is a banana, this is red, this is green, And like for example, right? Someone on here asked me about Myanmar. If all I had said about Myanmar is the military of Myanmar aren't communists, and neither is the democratic government, they're not communists, what we need is communism, that would offer you nothing. Bukharin's execution. That would offer you nothing. Right? You'd really, at that point, you wouldn't be grasping anything, right? At that point, you're just putting labels on things. And a lot of communist literature, especially Trotskyite literature, is basically a vocabulary lesson. Right? I mean, that's how Trotskyite literature tends to be. That's not socialism. That's capitalism. Like some of these Trotskyite websites, they'll write these big long screeds and not say anything. Right? All they will say in all their big long screeds is, like Myanmar. Their analysis of Myanmar would be the Myanmar military are not communists, of course. The Myanmar, democratic government, that was overthrown they're not communists, of course. What Myanmar needs is true communism. All right, good for you. Great. Wow, so profound. I learned so much from that, right? You're not having a deeper level of analysis, if that's kind of what you're reduced to. So I urge people to get beyond kindergarten communism, right? That just putting labels on things is not enough. If you want to really understand how the world works, and really understand why things are happening, you need to look at material forces. You need to look at who is backing somebody and who is against somebody. And like in Myanmar, there's no communism there, all right? There's no socialism, no workers' power. There's a pro-China faction that is pro-China for some reasons. There's an anti-China faction that is anti-China for some reasons. There is the USA pushing openness for their reasons. There is the military junta that there's a lot of things going on there. But if all I had done is do what a lot of these Trotskyite leaflets do and say, that's not communism. Myanmar is not communism. The military is not communism. Opposition's not communism. But what Myanmar needs is communism. This is what communism is. That's called, I call that kindergarten communism. It's very, very shallow analysis. It is just completely shallow analysis. And it's just, all you're really doing is putting labels on things. And if you just, and this is classic, right? Trotskyite literature is like this, right? It's like, it's just they give you, their response to everything is a vocabulary lesson. Well, vocabulary is important. It's important to know what communism is, what socialism is, what capitalism is. It's important to know all that. But there's a lot more to it. And if you're going to understand the world, you got to understand way more than communist, not communist. Communist, not communist, right? And also, you have to understand, and this is very important, that communism and socialism has changed a lot. And the Cold War stuff ain't coming back. They are not going to establish a Marxist-Leninist one-party state anywhere in the world. That is not going to happen. Okay? If you're waiting for the Bolsheviks to take power in some, and a repeat of the Russian Revolution, oh boy, oh boy, you're going to be waiting for a long time because that ain't going to happen. Okay? Like, no. Socialism has changed a lot. Venezuela, that's that. They moved towards socialism their way. I mean, it's pretty clear they control the state. They control the means of production. Bolivia, Ecuador, not Ecuador, but Nicaragua, right? If you look at what China's doing now, if you look at how Nepal, right, and the Communist Party has operated there, there's plenty of socialism and communism in the world right now, but it's not going to be the same kind of communism that we had during the Cold War. And it's going to change. And the kind of communism we have now is going to change, right? It's not going to be the same way it is now all the time. Communism is constantly changing. The world is constantly changing. A does not equal A. No two things in the universe are the same, right? And communism and socialism are constantly changing. And they assert themselves in very different ways with different ideologies. And that's why I wrote City Builders and Vandals. And that's what the point of this Center for Political Education, Center for Political Innovation educational manual that is on the brink of being published, that's what it's going to be about. Because only we have this, right? I mean, nobody has an updated analysis of what went on in the Cold War, what's going on in China, what's going on with Bolivarianism. Socialism exists in the world today. There is a socialist camp, and there's a capitalist camp, and they are economically not completely separated from each other, which makes it really confusing. So there you go. All right. I don't know how I got that out of Zizek, but there you go. All right. Genocide, West Papua. I don't know the situation there, so I'll have to look into that. All right. The Versailles Treaty and communists. Actually, that's interesting. That's an interesting question. I don't know quite why the person is asking that question. There may be a couple things they're getting at. Well, let's just talk about it. After World War I, the Versailles Treaty was the treaty that punished Germany for World War I. Right? Germany lost the war. They had to pay reparations to France and to other countries for the war. They weren't allowed to have their own military, etc. The Versailles Treaty. The Social Democratic Party of Germany, which was the biggest Marxist party in the world, which led the failed revolution after World War I, supported the Versailles Treaty. The Communist Party did not support the Versailles Treaty. That's an important distinction to make. A lot of people say, especially Nazis, say the Marxists supported the Versailles. No, the Social Democrats supported that treaty. The Communists always said the Versailles Treaty was wrong because average German workers didn't start World War I. It was the German capitalists who started World War I. And it was not fair to make German workers, average German working class people, pay reparations to France and to Britain. And that wasn't right. Right? And that economically punishing Germany and stopping its economic industrial development, etc., that was not right because the war was not caused by Germany being bad. It was caused by international capitalism. That was the Communist Party's position. The Social Democrats, on the other hand, said, yes, Germany was wrong in the war, and they accepted war guilt. Okay? That was an important distinction because a lot of the way that Hitler was able to rally support among German people was by saying, look how much we've been screwed by the Versailles Treaty. And he was not wrong. German working class people, they had to pay out of their own taxes reparations. That wasn't right. And Germany itself was industrially retarded. Like it couldn't develop its own industries. Its economics were limited. That wasn't right. The Versailles Treaty was unfairly punishing the German working class for the crimes, not just of the German capitalists. They were plenty guilty. The Kaiser, and they're evil folks, but so were the French capitalists, so were the British capitalists, so were the American capitalists. So the way Germany was punished after World War I in the Versailles Treaty was something the communists opposed, right? Dictatorship of the proletariat, here, gone, coming. Of the proletariat. Here, gone, coming. So the Versailles Treaty unfairly punished the German workers for World War I, and that was wrong. And the communists opposed it. The communists had protests against the Versailles Treaty. The Social Democrats supported it. One wild story I heard was that after Hitler came to power, in the concentration camps, in the forced labor camps, there were communists and Social Democrats that were both put into the prison camps. And at the prison camp, after Hitler was in power, he ripped up the Versailles Treaty. And there was a debate among the prisoners about whether or not they should support that. And some of the prisoners said, well, communists, we've always advocated tearing up the Versailles Treaty. So we don't support Hitler, but if they want us to have a celebration in our camp, if the Nazi guards are forcing us to celebrate the ripping up of the Versailles Treaty, we shouldn't boycott it. We should go along with it because we support ripping up the Versailles Treaty. And there were some prisoners in the concentration camp who said, no, this is a fascist celebration. We shouldn't celebrate it. And that was a debate they had in the prison camp. And some of the prisoners in the prison camp boycotted the celebration the prison guards were forcing on them. And some of the prisoners in the camp celebrated the ripping up of the Versailles Treaty. And that was a debate. Should you go along with the celebration of Hitler ripping up the Versailles Treaty or not? That was actually something that went on. And, there you go. But yeah, the Versailles Treaty was an awful treaty. Germany was unfairly victimized after World War I. They were blamed for a war that was Germany's fault, but it was also Britain and France and the United States' fault. And, and the German workers were made to pay for the crimes of the German capitalists, and that was wrong. Yeah, that's all there is to it. Okay, alrighty. Dems in power. Yeah, the Democrats are in power right now. I mean, right now, things don't look totally bleak. I mean, I'm happy that it looks like it's pretty clear that the nuclear treaty, the START treaty is going to be renewed. That's a really good sign. Trump was ripping up all the nuclear arms treaties, so that's a really good sign. And some of the sanctions against the Houthis and the Ansar Allah group in Yemen have also been lifted. That's a good sign, honestly. Now, the anti-Russia hysterics coming from the Biden administration are not good. The way they've handled this vaccine is an utter nightmare. They've lost 20 million vaccines. That's utter buffoonery. Hey, Biden, the reason we were supposed to vote for you is because you were going to fix this pandemic. Remember, Biden? You said that the pandemic was, so bad and we needed to vote for you to fix it. Well, you've only been in office for a little bit, but you lost 20 million vaccines, Biden. I'm a little bit, if you're supposed to be the great, savior here, how do you lose 20 million vaccines? 20 million vaccines. So there's a lot of problems going on with the vaccine distribution, and the Biden administration is doing a crappy job. All right. They are not doing a very good job handling the vaccine distributions. Okay. And they've only been in power for a couple weeks, and I like some of their international moves. Good to sign the START treaty. Good to lift sanctions against the Yemeni rebels. So, it's mixed so far, but when it comes to handling the pandemic, they've only been in power about, a week or two, so whatever. But, yeah, not seeing that. Not liking that. And now they say that Iran needs to make concessions if they're going to negotiate with Iran again. How are they going to... Iran has made huge concessions. Iran gave up its whole nuclear energy program. Iran did all kinds of things, and to agree to the nuclear deal. And then, now, Biden came back in and he says he wants to restart, but Iran needs to make some concessions. What concessions? Iran, not only did they make huge concessions, the USA then pulled out of the deal, killed Qasem Soleimani, killed their and you're saying to Iran, oh, you have... No, look, if Biden wants Iran to get back into the nuclear deal, he's going to have to beg them practically. I don't think Iran is going to go back into the nuclear deal. I'm just telling you, the supreme leader of Iran, what the Iranian people have been through in the last 4 years, with new sanctions, killing Qasem Soleimani, I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think that Iran is going to get back in the nuclear deal. That would be good, right? I would like to see better relations between the USA and Iran, but I think Trump nailed the door shut, and I don't think it's going to happen. Alrighty. Iraqi's invasion of Kuwait was justified. I really don't know enough about that. What I do know is the United States did give permission for Iraq to invade Kuwait. And I know that Ramsey Clark, former U.S. Attorney General, who I did have the honor of working with a little bit, not very much, but, here and there, I would, I delivered food to his apartment a couple times, and, I got to hang out with his granddaughters one time at a banquet, and, I interviewed him a couple times for Press TV when I was back working with them years ago, and, I've hung out with Ramsey Clark a little bit. I don't know him intimately or anything, but, we spent some time together, and he wrote a book called The Fire This Time. And it was about the U.S. invasion of Iraq, the Gulf War. And in it, he talks about how, and U.S. media never talks about this. They pretend it didn't happen. But before the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, the United States basically told Iraq it was okay to invade Kuwait. There was like a statement where the U.S. government basically said to Iraq, yeah, go ahead and invade Kuwait. And then when Kuwait got invaded, they whipped up this whole thing. So it was like Iraq was kind of lured into it in a way. But I don't know if it was justified, honestly. I don't know. I don't know if it was justified. One thing that was certainly covered up was that, Kuwait is not a democracy. Kuwait is not a democracy, right? It's like, oh, Saddam Hussein's an evil dictator. But Kuwait, no. They cut people's heads off in Kuwait. They torture people in Kuwait. It's a wealthy oil banking family. Kuwait is an oil autocracy, just like Saudi Arabia or Bahrain or, come on now. So the idea that the USA was defending democracy by, come on now. All righty. All right. Capitalism enables fascism. Yep. Yeah, it does, right? And that's the whole thing. These people who think fascism is of the left, no. Capitalism definitely enables fascism. There's always a fascist trend. There is a middle-class, anti-establishment right wing in capitalist society almost all the time, to some degree or other. The question is, how much are they empowered and mobilized? And that fascist opposition, exists in capitalist societies. And there are trends that are not fascist at the moment, but they kind of become that. So yeah, right. Trotskyism says that 21st century socialism is not true socialism. Well, see, that's interesting. Now, not even most, I would say it's complicated, okay? Because I remember when Hugo Chavez was in power, when he was still alive, a lot of Trots liked him, right? He would quote Trotsky on TV. He read from the transitional program of Leon Trotsky. He read the transitional program for socialist revolution, the Fourth International document on television. And Alan Woods, who's the leader of the International Marxist Tendency, IMT, met with Chavez a number of times. And Chavez even said he was a Trotskyist at one point. He said, I am a Trotskyist. I believe in the permanent revolution. So it's not totally accurate to say all Trotskyists are anti-Chavez, right? And you have to remember, in 2007, 2008, 2009, around that time, when the oil prices were still very high, when Bush was in office in the United States, and Chavez called Bush the devil, a lot of these synthetic left elements were not hostile to Venezuela. Amy Goodman gave a good interview to Hugo Chavez. Noam Chomsky was talking up Hugo Chavez then. A lot of these folks, it was a lot easier to support Venezuela at that time, and they were not ready to throw Venezuela under the bus. And, Noam Chomsky, other people were speaking positively of Hugo Chavez. Now, when things got tough, when the oil prices dropped after Chavez's death, the crisis in the country, Maduro, and all of a sudden, they threw him under the bus. Right? It's times are hard. People are, then they threw him under the bus, right? But, there were a lot of Trots who were speaking very positively of Hugo Chavez during those years, during the first decade of the 21st century. So that's important to note. The other thing is that there's a certain crowd of Trotskyists that were like always hating Venezuela. Right? What you call the orthodox Trotskyites, the ortho-Trots. Those folks have always hated Venezuela, right? And they said Hugo Chavez was a fascist, Hugo Chavez was a bonapartist. They never, they never Yeah, and they never supported it, right? The orthotrots, like the Spartacist League and, World Socialist website, people like that never supported Chavez. And what was it? It's based on, this is an apple, this is an orange, this is a true Trotskyist communist revolutionary. What? Chavez isn't one? Ah, get him out of here. Get him. I mean, it's just, yes, Chavez is not a Trotskyite revolutionary. He read Trotsky, he promoted Trotsky, but he really wasn't a Trotskyist, right? I mean, he said, I am a Trotskyist at one point. He also said he'd been a Maoist since he was 15. Empire by Hart and Negri. He said, I've been a Trotskyist since I was 15, blah, 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 blah. Well, he's been a Maoist since he was 15. He said he was a Trotskyist. He was none of that. He was a Bolivarian socialist. What they're doing in Venezuela it's never been done before, right? And that there's elements of Mao and Maoism in it. There's elements of of the Ba'ath in it. There's elements of Peronism in it. There's elements of classical Marxism in it. There's elements of Christian utopianism in it with their communes. I've been to Venezuela. There is nothing, A does not equal A. There is nothing repeating in the universe. What Venezuela is doing now is something that's never been done before. It's unique, and that's okay. Socialism changes as history marches forward. That's why I wrote City Builders and Vandals. In the book, I talk about the nature of 21st century socialism. What does it mean when people say China is bureaucratic socialism, not workers' state, or is it degenerated? Okay, we'll talk about that. That's actually a good question. Bureaucratic socialism. Degenerated. So, yeah, that's, I guess, some Trotskyists. The other thing you have to remember is, okay, so if you actually study Trotsky and the theory of permanent revolution, according to Trotsky, no country in the world is socialist, right? According to Trotskyists, socialism can only happen in the first world, right? Countries that are in the developing world, because they haven't had full capitalist industrialization first, can't have socialism. That's the theory of permanent revolution. Because countries are in the third world, and then that only the West can have full socialism. That's what Trotsky believed, and that's why he didn't agree with Stalin. Stalin said they were going to industrialize the USSR with the 5-year plans and have socialism in one country. Trotsky said, oh no, we need permanent revolution. The Soviet Union, we got to just make it a military holdout so we can seize the West, because the West is all that matters. Trotsky was enamored with the West. The theory of permanent revolution is the idea that only the Western capitalist countries can really have socialism. That's really what it's about, right? Trotsky said in his autobiography that New York City is the foundry where the fate of mankind will be forged. He said that the peasantry was a class without a future, and any country that had a peasant population could never have socialism, and he argued that basically the Bolsheviks should take power in Russia and make Russia a base area to seize the West, because unless the West had socialism, everything in the third world doesn't count. That's Trotskyism. That is the theory of permanent revolution. All that matters is the West, right? When Lenin wrote his book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, he explained that at the time that book was written, the revolutionary energy in the world was no longer in the West. It was in the East, right? Because of the situation where imperialism was keeping countries in the developing world poor, that whole nations would rise up, led by the working class, with the working class at the center of the struggle, to break free and have socialism. Lenin says basically socialism is coming from the East and not the West. In the West, you have the labor aristocracy developing. The Western capitalist countries are dividing the working class, so the revolution is going to come from the East. That's what Lenin says. That's the basis of third worldism, but that's another conversation. Lenin says in 1914 or 1910, the revolution is going to come from the East. And he was right. The revolution in the 20th century came from the East. Trotsky never really embraced that. His theory of permanent revolution never really embraced that. And if you read his polemics against Stalin, his polemics against Stalin on the question of China, his polemics against Stalin on the question of Britain, it's all about the fact that no. All that really matters is revolution in the West. And the Soviet Union doesn't really matter, and they should just become a military state, a military holdout, so that we can seize the West. And Stalin, if you read his writings, he's saying, no, the Russian people have been through blockades and ugly civil wars and 15 countries invading. We need to sign peace treaties with the West, and we need to focus on building up our own economy. We need socialism in one country. That's the difference between Stalin and Trotsky. And Trotsky's wrong, right? There has not been a revolution in the West, right? Until recently, the West had such a strong aristocracy of labor that revolution was really not possible. Anything good about cultural revolution? All right. So I think that that's important, right? And that understanding is very important. All right, next. All right. Bloodlands by Timothy Snyder. Awful book. I mean, it's an awful book, right? I mean, basically, the book is about, arguing that somehow the forces aligned with the Soviet Union in World War II were just as bad, if not worse, than the Nazis. That's basically what the book argues. And that is morally reprehensible and abhorrent. And, I mean, he starts out by saying, it's easy to try and romanticize anti-fascist fighters in the Soviet Union, but they were aligned with evil, rotten Stalin. And the whole point of the book is to try and say, well, sure, Hitler was bad, but those communists in World War II, they were bad too. Grover Furr, he did write this book, Blood Lies, which is a critique of that book, point by point. And he points to some blatant deception in Timothy Snyder's book. Now, Timothy Snyder has never answered Grover Furr's book. He's never replied to it. But that's, the fact that Timothy Snyder would write a book basically saying, okay, sure, Hitler was bad, but not as bad as those anyone who would talk that way, you know what they're doing. But Timothy Snyder, he's pandering to the Ukrainian right wing. The Russian Studies Department at Yale has long been about playing geopolitical games. It's not about academia. It's not about finding what the truth is. Look, great example, right? So we know that what they call the Great Terror in Russia, which was an awful time. It was a time when a lot of people went to gulags and a lot of awful things happened. The late 30s, there was the Great Terror, the Great Fear in the country. Yezhov Shina. Yezhov was the leader of the secret police, and there was this great fear in Russia. It was sparked by an incident that was the assassination of Sergei Kirov. All right, Sergei Kirov was like a government official in Russia. Someone shot him. Okay? Well, the guy who shot him was kind of a mentally ill guy. He shot him. Now, why was he shot? I don't know. Was there a wider conspiracy? I don't know. Okay? One thing that almost every Russian historian agrees is that Stalin was not responsible for killing Sergei Kirov. Okay? A lot of people think Kirov was just a crazy guy who acted alone. Other people say there was some kind of wider conspiracy, and that's what motivated the purge. But anyone in their right mind, nobody in their right mind, no historian thinks that Stalin sent this guy to kill Sergei Kirov so we could have a big evil purge, right? That is something, but you know what? They have spent millions of dollars, and this should sicken you. The ruling class has spent millions of dollars trying to dig up any possible way that Stalin could be responsible for the killing of Sergei Kirov. And that should be shocking to you. But, and some of these crazy anti-Stalin people, 2011, Timothy Snyder admitted some stuff. Okay, great. I don't follow his stuff. But they have it bent over backwards to try and convince people, to try and find any evidence that Sergei Kirov, that Stalin, the killing of Sergei Kirov was a false flag by Stalin so he could have a big purge. Well, there's no one claims that. Trotsky never claimed that. Trotsky said that he was an adventurist, and it was an adventurist action. Nobody thinks that Sergei Kirov was assassinated by Stalin so he could have a big crazy purge. Nobody thinks about that. Nobody thinks that. Nobody thinks that, okay? But the fact that the ruling class has spent millions of dollars funding scholars, just trying their hardest to show that somehow Sergei Kirov, it was all an evil plot from Stalin. That's beyond me, okay? All right. Petty investors against finance capital. Look, we can all agree that the ultra-rich are the main enemy, and that there are middle-class elements who sometimes they'll go along with the working class, sometimes they won't, and that libertarianism and other trends, middle-class ideological trends are out there, and that there's going to be a lot of anger at Wall Street and at big money and at the ultra-rich. This petty investor, the GameStop thing, it shows how Wall Street is rigged in favor of some people. That's really what it shows. So there you go. Is the RCP controlled opposition? No, I don't think so. I think that Bob Avakian and Sincera Taylor and Carl Dix probably really believe what they're saying. I don't think they're government agents. I think they're honest actors. I think they're wrong. And see, that's the thing. Just because I disagree with people doesn't mean they're government agents. I just think they're wrong, right? They're not Nazis. They're not Nazbols. They're not fascists. They're just wrong. All right? Now, there are some things that went on in the history of the RCP that made people feel like they were possibly infiltrated or being like nudged by the government to do certain things. And but see, that happens to every communist group. Look, okay? You have to admit, right, if you're going to be an activist in the United States, the state, this is what people don't seem to realize, right? There are government informers in communist groups. That happens, right? And if you're going to have a communist group in the United States, there's probably going to be government informers in it. And there's nothing you can do about it. So just, I'm not saying that means they're good, but that's not what I'm saying at all. I don't think that's a good thing. I wish, the ruling class would just leave communist organizations alone. Unfortunately, though, that's not the situation, right? We know that the government, if you have a communist group in the United States, the government is going to infiltrate and send, informers into you, and they're going to monitor your activities, etc. That's just how this works. Okay? And people assume that they just watch the groups or they try to frame them for doing illegal things. But actually, there are some cases where it looks like not only does the government infiltrate these groups, but it kind of nudges them. To do one thing or do another. Okay? That happens. Right? That elements of the deep state will infiltrate these groups and kind of try to nudge their activities in certain ways to push an agenda of a faction of the ruling class. That happens. Look, why do you think all this foundation money is handed out? Right? Why do you think all this money from the Open Society Institute and George Soros, and why do you think that there's all this money handed out to left-wing activists? You think the ruling class, there's some of them that just believe in communism. No, they're trying to nudge activists to do certain things. Read all about the revolution will not be funded. Why do you think all this foundation money goes out to people, like Black Lives Matter Incorporated? There's an effort to nudge certain, the ruling class sees activists as useful. They're having fights among themselves, and they see the left as useful. So I think there are times the RCP, probably like many other communist groups, has been nudged to do things that weren't helpful. And I think that they genuinely wanted to do them. I don't think they were agents or puppets, but they did some things that were, I would call it ultra-left. And even though they thought they were doing the right thing, they were kind of hurting things. Great example, right? So the RCP, it's the Revolutionary Union, which is like, a group of activists in the Bay Area. 1975, they become the Revolutionary Communist Party. Well, when Deng Xiaoping comes to power in China, they denounce China, so the wing of the RCP, the majority of the RCP gets kicked out. And so what's left are the people that follow Bob Avakian. Bob Avakian is, he's considered the leader. 1979, right, United States. That's around the time the RCP, was becoming what it is today. It's led by Bob Avakian. And they denounced China. They cut their ties with China. You have to remember in the United States, there was something called the Iran hostage crisis, right? You remember this? That in Iran, they had the socialist, or the anti-imperialist revolution. Iran has their revolution, and the Iranians seized the U.S. embassy. Very famous, right? The hostage crisis, right? And so Americans are being held by, by the Iranians. So all across the United States, and you have to remember, Jimmy Carter was the president, and he was a liberal. And so the Republicans are playing up this idea that Jimmy Carter is a liberal and he's soft, and we need a strong right-wing Republican to get in there and kick Iran's ass, right? That was basically the idea, right? Jimmy Carter is a soft liberal, and look, he's letting America be humiliated by this embassy. So all across the United States, Republicans and conservatives started having anti-Iran rallies, burning the Iranian flag, burning pictures of Ayatollah Khomeini. There were T-shirts people would wear that said Iran sucks, and it was like this whole right-wing mobilization against Iran that happened in 1979, right? The Iran hostage crisis, and it was a big mobilization, against Iran. During that moment, the RCP started going to those rallies, those right-wing conservative rallies against Iran, and burning the American flag and chanting, "It's not our embassy, it's not our embassy." And these crowds of right-wingers would kick their ass, right? And they would get beaten up, and they would go to the hospital, and it was weird, okay? And why were they doing this? They were basically doing this because they almost became, it was part of the rally, right? They were like props, right? The ruling class is staging this rally. And so it's like, oh, our great American embassy has been seized. Oh, aren't you mad about it? Don't you hate Iran? And look, here are some evil left-wingers who support it. And then the crowds would beat them up. And what did they accomplish by doing that? Right? And it was kind of like they were there to fire up the right wing. Right? They were and they got injured and beaten up, and some of them even got killed during this time period. But they were kind of like, they were like, it was like they were kind of being used, right? It's kind of like how before the Trump rallies, the way they would incite the crowd was they would have protesters in the crowd, and the crowd would get pumped up as the security was kicking out the protesters. And the crowd would get pumped up like, yeah, we're on the winning team. Look, this guy came to protest our rally and we kicked his ass, right? And it's a way of getting the crowd fired up is you have someone who disagrees be surrounded and get dragged out, and the crowd is pumped up by this. This is the Nazis used to do this at their rallies. Oswald Mosley used to do this at his rally. This is a classic, it's a fascist staging tactic, right? When you're trying to incite the crowd to be in kind of a mean-spirited fighting mood, you get somebody from the opposition to come and get dragged out and beaten up, and the crowd gets excited, yeah, we won. It's like they're watching a movie or something, right? It's a psyching up the crowd. So the RCP, when they would go to these rallies, against Iran, and light the American flag on fire, and chant, "It's not our embassy, it's not our embassy," and then the crowd would get all fired up and kick their ass, it was like they were helping, right? And it was like they were and there were a lot of things the RCP did in that time in particular that were like that. They had a very provocative demonstration against Deng Xiaoping at the White House. Death to Deng Xiaoping. And this is a time when China is desperately trying to get U.S. investment, and Deng Xiaoping is meeting with Jimmy Carter, and they're there outside the White House, and I don't think that was the right thing to do. But you have to remember, there was also a big right-wing campaign in the United States against diplomatic relations with China. Brzezinski and the more liberal wing of the ruling class, the more liberal wing of the U.S. ruling class, wanted to have diplomatic relations with China. Because they wanted to use China against the Soviet Union, right? The idea that there are two communist countries, big, huge communist countries, the Soviet Union and China. Brzezinski and Henry Kissinger said, let's recruit China as an ally against the Soviet Union. And they had done it, right? And in Kampuchea War. So at the time, Deng Xiaoping is at the White House, right? There were billboards all over the United States. The John Birch Society and a lot of Republicans were against U.S. diplomatic relations with China, because China is communist, and communists are just evil. It was the liberals who wanted better relations with China. It was the conservatives who were saying, oh, you can't have relations with communists, right? Brzezinski's whole thing is manipulate communists against each other. Right-wingers are just, communists are evil, kill them all. So at the time that Deng Xiaoping is meeting with Jimmy Carter. The RCP had a death to Deng Xiaoping rally, right? And a few hundred of their members were outside the White House chanting death, death, death to Deng Xiaoping, and a couple of their members got somehow, who knows how, were given press credentials to go into the White House, okay? You can look this up. We're given press credentials to get into the White House. They do that all the time, right? They do that all the time, right? Doesn't the White House press corps give communists press credentials to get in? I mean, they always do that, don't they? No, they don't. And somehow they got into the White House, and they attacked they ran at Deng Xiaoping with the little red book and were screaming at him. Something was going on there, okay? There was a division in the U.S. ruling class. I think it's very possible that certain, probably the more conservative faction of the U.S. ruling class was kind of using the RCP, and the RCP didn't know about it. They were infiltrated, or they were being nudged to try and threaten Deng Xiaoping and undermine U.S. relations with China, and to try and be kind of the rodeo clowns, or the evil communists who got the crowd riled up at the anti-Iran rallies. I think that may have been what was going on. I don't know. I wasn't alive at this time. I mean, I'm only 33 years old. I wasn't alive. So, but I think that on some level that was probably going on. And it's shortly after that Bob Avakian went into exile and left the United States. And my suspicion is that at the time, I think the RCP believed in everything they were doing. I don't think, they're not government agents. They're not, no, come on now. They believed in everything they were doing, but that they're probably the more conservative right wing of the U.S. ruling class was kind of nudging them to do stuff. And I don't know how that nudge was carried out, but that's my suspicion, is that was going on. That's my suspicion, is that they were being nudged in one direction by the U.S. ruling class. I could be wrong about that, but based on reading enough of that history, it seems to me like they were being nudged. Right after that, the RCP launched their May Day 1980 campaign, and it was a similar kind of thing, right? 1980, it's the, Ronald Reagan, and Jimmy Carter is president. He's being called a communist by the right wing. The right wing is getting fired up, and they have these rallies around the United States. They pretend it's going to be a general strike, and it ain't. Like, the RCP is trying to call a general strike, and it ain't a general strike. I'll tell you that much. It was not a general strike. RCP is a few hundred people, and they're pretending it's a general strike. They have T-shirts, "I won't work on May Day, will you?" And they made it look like they were going to have a general strike on May 1st. Well, they weren't. Okay, so they did that, and in order to build their general strike, they did a lot of very provocative stuff, like walking into factories with big red flags and trying to get the workers to go on strike when the workers had no idea who they were and were like, "Get out of my face, please." And they did a lot of very provocative things, waving pictures of Mao in people's faces and waving the red flag around to try and incite people to do stuff. And again, it was a lot of situations where instead of getting working class people to become communists, instead they were getting working class people to kick their ass. That's really, it was just, they would kind of be very hostile and combative, and that's kind of their style. Look, the RCP, they use the F word. If you've ever been around an RCP person, it's F this, F that, F this, F, F, the F word, and they're very combative, right? If they don't agree with you, they yell at you, they're very combative. And that in about 1979, 1980, the RCP was going around and being very combative and being very in your face with people, waving red flags, and people would just beat them up. Average working class people who were right wing and were being pushed in a right wing direction because of Ronald Reagan would beat them up. That's why I would say the RCP is a rather ultra-left group. The RCP is almost, there's not much left of them at this point. I don't know. They had the big, I would just say, Bob's getting old and they're making videos. And Bob's got a YouTube channel and he's got some videos up there and they're protesting Donald Trump, refuse fascism. RCP ain't going to be around too much longer. Okay. Let's just be real. Okay. Eventually Bob is going to, move on to the next life, I guess. I mean, it's inevitable, right? I mean, people get old. And at that point, at this point, I think they've declared that they're no longer Marxist, Leninist, Maoists. They're Avakianists or whatever. And the RCP ain't going to be around too much longer, okay? I mean, but the same for Workers' World, okay? The same for a lot of these parties. The Spartacus League, which was one of the biggest communist parties, I mean, they were one of the main communist groups. They haven't published an issue of their newspaper since April, okay? Since April, there has not been a new issue of the Workers' Vanguard. They published one little leaflet saying, don't vote for Joe Biden. That's it. The Spartacus League is pretty much gone. The Spartacus League is pretty much defunct, okay? A lot of these communist groups, look, they served a purpose in the time they were around, okay? These groups, in the 70s, they served a real purpose. They don't serve a purpose anymore, a lot of these groups. DSA serves a purpose. PSL serves a purpose, and there are groups that are still around. There are certainly groups that are still around. Socialist Alternative, PSL, the Communist Party, and there are groups that are going to be around for a long time, right? The Communist Party is not going away. The PSL is not going away. DSA is not going away. This is not an endorsement of any of these groups. I don't like them. I'm not saying I'm not endorsing any of these groups, right? I know people in some of these groups. I really don't like some of these other groups, but I'm just telling you, DSA, PSL, Socialist Alternative, those groups are, Communist Party USA, those groups are around and they're alive and they're doing stuff and they serve a purpose. They have like a role to play. But a lot of these parties that are kind of left over from the 70s, they don't really have a purpose. These groups were very, very important in the 70s. They kind of, struggled to hold on to their importance in the 80s. In the 90s, they were really irrelevant, by about, the Iraq War, the U.S. invasion of Iraq, was kind of the last hurrah of a lot of these groups. The Iraq War protest movement. I remember that. That was my first, that was how I came into politics. That was the big thing when I was getting into politics. And that was kind of the very end of the 1960s and 70s left. That was like the last moment where those people really were doing anything. And they were protesting the Iraq War. And they were doing that, and they were certainly doing that. And, now we've got DSA, we got PSL, we got Socialist Alternative, we got the Communist Party, and there you go. All right, I don't know. I'm sure the RCP hates everything I just said, and I hope that they don't, whatever. I mean, my apologies. I'm sure there's a lot of really good people in the RCP. I'm just giving you my analysis. That's the way I see it. I don't think RCP is going to be around for too much longer, but who knows? I could be wrong. All right. Okay, Marxist versus neoliberal definition of imperialism. I think that, there's the Marxist understanding of imperialism, which is that imperialism is not a policy. It's not a verb, right? People think imperialism is when a country invades another country. When a country invades or attacks another country, it's engaging in imperialism. That's not the Marxist definition, right? Imperialism is not a verb. It's not a policy. It's a system. Imperialism is a system. It is capitalism in its monopoly stage, where a few banks and corporations control the global economy and keep the world poor so that they can stay rich. Lenin actually lays out 5 characteristics of imperialism: the centralization of capital, finance capital, taking dominance over industrial capital, the creation of giant cartels, etc. Right? And I've read that. Lenin gives a 5-part definition of a global economic system of imperialism. That's what imperialism is. Neoliberal people or most non-Marxist people think imperialism is a country taking over another country, a country influencing another country. That's not what imperialism is. There's a specific understanding of imperialism as being a stage of capitalism. And I think that's the difference there. And, you'll see, classic example, right? Someone was tweeting at me, being provocative, one of these anti-Russia trolls. Was tweeting at me that Russia is imperialist in Syria because Gazprom, the Russian natural gas company, is partnering with the Syrian government natural gas company. Now, how is that imperialism? Syria is an underdeveloped country, and it's it's facing a civil war at the hands of the imperialists. It's trying to get its economy going. So Russia, with its state-run natural gas company, is entering a partnership with the Syrian government's state-run natural gas company to try and make Syria wealthier by exploiting its natural gas resources. There's nothing imperialist about that. No, I mean, that's not imperialism. But people are like, oh, see, they're taking their resources. No, they're not taking their resources. They're entering a business partnership, right? No, if it was imperialism, if Russia was engaging in imperialism, they'd be going there and they'd be doing everything they could to force Syria to not develop their natural gas resources. And then, on top of that, they would be forcing Syria to buy Russian natural gas. That would be imperialism. But no, they're going there and they're helping. I don't talk about my job, so don't go there. They would be helping. They would be helping. They're helping Syria to develop its own economy, its own state-run natural gas company. That's not imperialism. Imperialism wants captive markets. It wants to hold back economic development in the developing world. So it's not imperialism. China going to Africa and building a railroad so that countries can have more industry is not imperialism, right? Imperialism is the USA overthrowing the socialist president of Honduras, Manuel Zelaya, and then making sure that Honduras stays an impoverished, drug-infested country with mass illiteracy and starving that has to import all of its products from American companies. Imperialism is about holding back economic development. That's what imperialism is. Countries in the developing world joining arm in arm to engage in economic development is not imperialism, right? And this is what people need to understand. Right? What Russia is doing, what China is doing, I've heard people say Venezuela is imperialist. This is my favorite. Venezuela is imperialist because it's building housing in Nicaragua. No, I've heard this. People have seriously tried to make this argument that Venezuela, this Venezuelan state-run housing company is going to Nicaragua and building housing for low-income people. That's imperialism. How? How is that imperialism? Well, it's a company from one country going to another. That's not what imperialism is. Imperialism is about holding back economic development. That is what imperialism is. Imperialism is not trading with another country. So, yeah, Iran sending its military to help the Iraqi people fight Wahhabi terrorists is not imperialism. Iran sending its military to Syria to help the Syrian government fight Al-Qaeda and ISIS is not imperialism, okay? Just because one country sends its military to another country is not necessarily imperialism, right? Imperialism is an economic relationship, and more specifically, it is an economic relationship that is about keeping people poor. That is what imperialism is, okay? So imperialism refers to a system, a global system, in which Western countries keep the world poor in order to make themselves rich. Very clearly not what Russia is doing around the world. Very clearly not what China is doing around the world. Very clearly not what Venezuela is doing around the world or what Iran is doing around the world. Very clearly not that. So, all right. I hope I answered that question. All right. Trump connected to the USSR. Yep. Donald Trump, I guess in the 1980s, he sat down with the KGB. And together, they worked on a horrendous plot to contaminate our bodily fluids, to contaminate our precious bodily fluids, right? I mean, come on. Oh, my God. I mean, give me a break. Yeah, the KGB. Yeah, right. Okay, let me get this straight. So Donald Trump meets with the KGB before the Soviet Union fell. And they come up with this plan. And they sit there and they plot that the Soviet Union will fall. Bill Clinton will be president. George W. Bush will be president. Barack Obama will be president. And then, based on the problems of the Obama presidency, with a totally new government in Russia that comes in after the Soviet Union has been overthrown, they'll together plot to make Trump. This is the dumbest thing I have ever heard in my life. And the fact that Cenk Uygur repeats this malarkey. Seriously, I mean, you want to talk about a stupid conspiracy theory? Do you know how much predicting the KGB must have done. This. This is the dumbest thing I have ever. People still listen to Cenk Uygur after all of this. I mean, it shows that if the algorithms, if Silicon Valley is gunning for you, I mean, it is the dumbest conspiracy theory I have ever heard. Before the fall of the Soviet Union, Trump made a deal with the KGB, and they've been working at. There's a Simpsons clip. You ever watch The Simpsons? There's a clip where they say something like the Soviet Union fell, and then it's like, that's what you think, and the Soviet Union like comes back, and like Lenin starts walking out of the tomb like a zombie. It's like, yeah. I mean, yeah. All right. I mean, it's just. And it shows that, like, these people want to, like, we got to crack down on disinformation. We got to crack down on fake news. No one's blocking Cenk Uygur from saying the dumbest shit I've ever heard, right? No one's saying, Cenk Uygur, that is so obviously disinformation. That's clearly disinformation. The notion that Donald Trump's presidency is the result of a conspiracy with the KGB that started in the 1980s is the most ludicrous, crazy, idiotic conspiracy theory I have heard in my life. There's no censorship of it. There's no banning of it. Why? It serves imperialism. The imperialists want you to believe, oh no, it's not that our system's falling apart. Oh no, it's not that we've cultivated crazy right-wing ideas in the United States. Oh no, it's not that a lot of Rust Belt people are angry at the status quo. Oh no, it's not that Americans are tired of the... Donald Trump, everything you saw for the past 4 years, the disaster of the past 4 years, was all Putin's fault. It was all a Russian plot. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to cover themselves with this. And it is so ridiculous. It is the most ridiculous, insane thing I've ever heard. In the 1960s, the John Birch Society, this crazy right-wing group, they had a secret book claiming that Dwight Eisenhower was a communist. The Republican president, Dwight Eisenhower, was a communist. And they had the common sense to keep it secret and only show it to like trusted members because they knew most people would laugh at them when they heard about it. So they kept it secret. And it was kind of a scandal. And people would go to their events and they would have public speaking engagements. They'd say, is it true that you have a secret book that says Eisenhower is a communist? They'd say, oh, no, we have no book. No. Well, it was eventually revealed and they published it. It's called The Politician by Robert Welch. And it is this crazy group, and everyone laughed at them. There's a song by the Chad Mitchell Trio. It was a folk group, a folk singing group. It was popular at the time. They made a song making fun of them for this. The John Birch Society became a joke, right? And they also said fluoride in the drinking water. The fluoride was a communist conspiracy. And they made the movie, Dr. Strangelove, Our Precious Bodily Fluids. Yeah, it became a joke. People used to laugh at this kind of nonsense. People used to just laugh at this, but now the liberals are doing it. The liberals are the new John Birch Society. All right. What do I think about abolishing prisons? I would like to get to a society that is so prosperous and so peaceful that prisons are not needed. That's absolutely. I am for, in the long term, abolishing prisons. However, and that's really, if you read prison abolition literature, if you read, Angela Davis is the one who really started this, by the way. Angela Davis really started the abolish prison stuff, right? And she did it in the 90s, and no one paid any attention to her, right? She was obscure. She was this old communist from the 70s, and it was like... But Angela Davis, she started talking about the prison industrial complex, and she started talking about prison abolition. And it was like only like radical leftists listened to her. But then, speed ahead, now Michelle Alexander wrote her book about the new Jim Crow, and now, there's widespread talk of, the prison industrial complex, etc. Look, I think that getting to a society that is stateless and classless, where no one is ever threatened with prison, would be a very good thing. I think that would be a very good thing. I don't think it's feasible in our time. I don't, right? I mean, in this moment that we're in, obviously, and if we had a socialist society tomorrow, there would be a whole bunch of right-wing crazy extremists trying to overthrow us, and we'd have to put them somewhere, right? So, and that's like slogans like abolish prisons. If you say to average working people, I want to abolish prisons, they think you're cuckoo. Okay? I'm just serious. Like, if you say to people, abolish prisons, right? Average working people. You say to them, hey, I'm part of a group and we want to abolish, knock, knock, knock. Hello, my name is Joe Bob. I'm from the local socialist and communist organization. Oh, great. What does your group believe in? I believe in abolishing prisons. The person behind who answered the door says, okay, I've got kids. You want to let every child molester and kidnapper and rapist and axe murderer and serial killer out of jail. That's what your group believes in? Get the hell out of my neighborhood. And they slam the door shut. Right? Knock, knock, knock. Hello, I'm from the local socialist and communist group. Oh, tell me about your group. What do you believe? We want to abolish prisons. Oh, really? So all the drug dealing, serial killers, murderers, and rapists, you just want to let them all out? Get the hell out of my neighborhood. Okay? It doesn't make sense to average people. And the thing is, it's provocative. It's intentionally provocative. Angela Davis, it was academic. She's trying to be provocative to academia. And what she's saying, in a coded, careful way, is we need to get to communism. We need to get to the ultimate goal of a stateless, classless world of vast material abundance, in which the need for any form of coercion and political repression is not needed. That's the ultimate goal of communism, a world that with so much material abundance, a stateless, classless world, in which the need for any coercion is abolished, and the freedom of all is the freedom of the individual. Right? That's the ultimate goal. And that's the ultimate goal is for all of humanity to be far richer than billionaires, the need for the state to fade away. That's the ultimate goal of a stateless, classless world. Okay? And that's what abolish prisons ultimately means, right? You would have to have communism to abolish prisons. However, to average working people, if you say, it's the same with the no borders thing, right? If you say open borders now, people give you the same look, okay? It's like, you need to have slogans that seem practical, right? I am for eventually getting to a world without prisons, absolutely. But it's not a practical demand in this moment. It's a theoretical, ideological thing. Okay, we need to start getting through these because it's getting late. I've been on here for a long time. It's gonna be 3 hours pretty soon. All right, isolationist libertarian views similar to anti-imperialists. It's weird, but I think that there are a lot of isolationist libertarians who are so opposed to U.S. foreign policy that they are sympathetic to any force around the world that stands against it. I've said to those people many times, have you ever noticed that all the countries the USA overthrows are socialist? And when the USA overthrows them, they bring capitalism? You ever notice that? You want to slap these people, right? They're like, oh, I'm against this war. The USA, the CIA carried out coups in these. It's like, yeah, all the people the USA overthrows are socialist. And when it overthrows them, it brings capitalism. But you still think that the USA is communist and the answer is capitalism. Okay, right? It's beyond me. It is really beyond me how, if someone understands how evil U.S. foreign policy is, gets to the point where they're for whoever the United States is against, and still somehow in their mind thinks the answer is capitalism, the USA goes around the world spreading capitalism. So it's frustrating, but I think it's look, I read you all of this, and I read to you about how all the conditions are here, but the ideology is not here. Right? I read to you the economic crisis, socialism rising in the world. But the ideology is here. The ideology is not there. People have no idea what a socialist or a communist believes. All across the United States, there are so many people who are waking up and they're against these wars. They're against the empire. They're against, the boss. But they have no idea about any of the socialism stuff. So, of course, they're going to become libertarians, right? That's why we have to go to these people with ideology. Ideology, not shut up racist, not you deserve to be poor, but ideology. All right. Leftism and trauma. Look, I don't even want to go down that rabbit hole right now. I don't even know a lot of people have trauma. This system, there's a lot of ugly cruelty that takes place in this system. People have trauma. And with their trauma, they can be motivated sometimes to do great things, but also trauma holds people back. It can cause people, to have social difficulties in being organized. Trauma is just a reality of this system. People experience trauma, all kinds of trauma, right? I mean, whether it's, growing up, child abuse, or, prison, going to prison, or police brutality, or there's all kinds of trauma that people experience under this system. And in some cases, that trauma can motivate them to become great activists. But in other cases, that trauma can hold them back, okay? And, obviously, as we're building a movement, a revolutionary movement, to try and, build a new society, we're going to have to work around people's trauma. I mean, that's all there is to it. I don't want to get too down that rabbit hole because we've been going for almost 3 hours. So there you go. All right. But yeah, trauma is just a reality. Look, if you walk around this society, there's a lot of people with trauma. There's a lot of people who've been through a lot of stuff, right? We all think it's funny, right? I think all of us have like a dual mindset. On the one hand, a lot of us think that the bad things that have happened to us in our life are unique to us. No one has ever suffered like we suffered, number one. And number two, all of us think whatever we went through wasn't a big deal, right? It's weird how we think that, right? That no one's ever suffered the way we've suffered, number one, right? Our suffering is like the worst and unique, number one. And number two, whatever we suffered, oh, it's not a big deal. We just need to be. And no, the reality is a lot of people suffer, number one. A lot of people have been through hardship in their life, number one. Number two, what that doesn't make it okay. And that dealing with that hardship and that trauma affects you. It affects people. So there you go. What is this super chat here? Hear about 9-year-old getting pepper sprayed by the cops. There's an example. That kid is going to be traumatized. I did not hear about that, but that kid is going to be traumatized. If a 9-year-old child is pepper sprayed by the police, he is going to be traumatized for his life. And that trauma might motivate him to become a great revolutionary activist. It might give him the ability to have empathy and to be a bold, but it might also hold him back. He might develop PTSD. That trauma is a complicated factor. Everyone has some degree of trauma, all right? Everyone has experienced some level, right? There are varying degrees of it. You talk about soldiers that come back from war and are just completely not well. And then you talk about, average people that are just typical and normal, but they have certain associations in their mind. Look, your memory, the way your mind works is you associate different things, right? If your favorite teacher, imagine that your favorite teacher in school wore a green shirt every day. Every single day, your favorite teacher, the best teacher you ever had, wore a green shirt every day. Every single day, you are going to, for the rest of your life, whether you know it or not, you're going to have a positive association with the color green. That's not trauma, but those kind of associations exist in your mind. And a lot of them are unconscious, like you don't know about them. So I think that's what the person's getting at that. Actor Sterling Hayden, who delivered the precious bodily fluids line in Dr. Strangelove, was a communist and persecuted for it. Wow, I did not know that. I did not know that about that actor. I had no clue. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Strangelove is a great movie. I really like it. Okay, next question. Would the left or right support it when people get dragged to prison? Unfortunately, look, we've seen this, right? The right, every time communists get arrested, they celebrate it. The left, every time somebody on the right gets arrested, they celebrate it. I don't think that's the correct position. I think we should not be celebrating the police state in the United States expanding. We shouldn't be celebrating Silicon Valley censoring people. I think that those of us who are worried about the rise of a low-wage police state should be opposing all of this repression. But unfortunately, if you listen to certain voices that will not be named that represent leftism, every time they ban a right-wing account, they celebrate, and on the right, it's the same way. Every time a left-wing person is arrested or something, they celebrate. It never occurs to these people, so there you go. Would the U.S. empire do something catastrophic in decline? Well, no, I don't think that the USA would nuke the whole world. But do the imperialists become desperately vicious? And do they do evil things in the process of fighting off socialism? Sure. All right. Does racism influence modern anti-Chinese sentiments? Absolutely, it does. Absolutely, right? It's not just an attack on China politically; it is cultural. Right? There is a war against Chinese culture right now. They're demonizing China. They're saying that Chinese people are inherently authoritarian. You've seen all of this, right? You turn on Fox News, listen to the Trumpers and their anti-China hysterics. There's a racial edge to it. You bet there is. You betcha. All righty. Should we oppose liberals oppressing the far right? I think so. I think that, look, we should set a line in the sand against tech censorship. It's not about supporting the far right. It's about knowing that they'll come for us next. I'm not saying we should align with the far right, but I'm saying that Silicon Valley shouldn't have the power to censor. The U.S. government shouldn't have the power to censor. Free speech for all. I don't trust the capitalists and the capitalist ruling class of the United States to have the power to shut up, to control things. All right. Bukharin's execution. Well, Bukharin, I don't know the specifics about his execution. Nikolai Bukharin was a Bolshevik, was one of the founding Bolsheviks with Lenin. And he confessed at the Moscow trials of 1936 to being part of a conspiracy against the Soviet Union. I don't know enough about it. I don't know enough about the details. Was he guilty or not? And I don't know all that. He confessed, and I believe he was executed for it. I don't know. That's all I know. Okay? And, I mean, I can tell you what happened. That there was a trial, the Moscow trials, very famous. Bukharin, at the trial, confessed to allegedly doing that. Some people say he was tortured or brainwashed or something like that. I don't know what happened. And then he was executed for it. Now, someone asked me, did Stalin approve of that? I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I know what the historical record says. That's all I know, right? Okay. Dictatorship of the proletariat. Here, gone, or coming. Well, dictatorship of the proletariat, okay? So, this is where it gets all weird, but, you read Critique of the Goethe Program by Karl Marx. You read the Communist Manifesto. It's not a good translation. Dictatorship of the proletariat means the rule of the proletariat, right? To dictate, right? If you're writing something and I'm dictating to you, I'm telling you what to write. And the idea is that under capitalism, we have the dictatorship of the ruling class, meaning the ruling class are the ones dictating. The idea is that under socialism, the proletariat will be dictating. That's the idea. The better translation would be the rule of the proletariat, or the government of the proletariat. The idea is that on behalf of all of society, and Engels makes that clear, it'll be a united front of different elements with the working class at the center. The government will be, the working class will take control of the government. Right? It's a seizure of political power. And it's separate from socialism because it's only control of the government. The dictatorship of the proletariat is control of political power, but it's through establishing control of the state that then socialism, popular control of the economy, can be established. So they're two different things, right? The dictatorship of the proletariat is the seizure of control of the state, right? Socialism is the seizure of control of the economy. That's the difference. Okie dokie. Alrighty. I have not read Empire by Hart and Negri. I need to. It's like on my list of things to do. It was one of those books that was widely discussed. So what is the bureaucratic socialism or degenerated? Again, we're talking a lot about Trotskyism tonight. It's funny. I'm anti-Trotsky, so why are people asking me so much about Trotskyism? But I know Trotskyism. I was in a Trotskyite group for many years, or at least a group that thought they were Trotskyists. So I can explain this, all right? So Trotsky turned against the Soviet Union, right? He went into exile, went around the world giving speeches denouncing the Soviet Union. Trotsky never said the Soviet Union was capitalist. According to Leon Trotsky, the Soviet Union was what he called a degenerated workers' state or a deformed workers' state. And he said that the Soviet Union didn't have a new ruling class, it had a parasitical bureaucracy. That's what the term he used. He said, look, the Soviet communist leaders, this is true, they lived in fancy houses, they drove fancy cars, they got paid sometimes like 100 times the average pay of a worker. So are they the new capitalist class? Trotsky said, no, they are not the new capitalist class because they don't exploit the workers to make profits. They are a parasitical bureaucracy, meaning that the workers and the bureaucrats, their money comes out of the same place. There's not a hostile relationship, right? They're not driving the workers to produce more so they can sell more and make profits. Not a profit-centered economy, but out of what the workers produce, the parasitical bureaucracy gets a bigger share. Well, Lenin wrote a lot about bureaucracy and how bureaucracy was a necessity in the Soviet Union. When you have a shortage of food, when you're building socialism on the basis of scarcity, you are going to have to ration things out. You can't just, you're going to have ration, right? You're going to have a line of people lining up when food is scarce. You're going to have to ration food. You're going to have to ration it out. So make sure everyone gets their food. But someone is going to have to take on the responsibility of being the guard who makes sure that everyone stays in line and doesn't take somebody else's food. Right? They're going to demand a bigger slice of food because they're taking on that responsibility. Right? They could just be like the people in the line, but instead they're taking on the responsibility of enforcing the rules, so they're going to demand bigger compensation. And that is the basis of bureaucracy. And Lenin said it's a necessity. Right? You're going to have bureaucracy in a socialist society. It's going to happen. Right? Stalin, his whole idea was, okay, we're going to have a bureaucracy, but to make sure the bureaucracy doesn't restore capitalism, we're going to have a police state and we're going to terrorize them. We're going to have a secret police that'll keep them in line and be spying on them all the time and make sure they're true to the party line. That didn't work out too well. After Stalin died, Khrushchev, bureaucrat, came in there and ripped Stalin a new one. And by the 80s, half the bureaucracy in the Soviet Union didn't believe in communism anymore, and the Soviet Union fell. Mao had the opposite, not the opposite, but a different approach. Mao's idea in the 1970s, or 1960s, was, okay, we have a bureaucracy in China, but we're going to mobilize the population. We're going to have the young people be red guards to go out and constantly be hounding the bureaucracy and threatening them and making sure they don't take the capitalist route. That was a way of controlling the bureaucracy. Okay. At the end of the day, now what socialist countries do is they create a market sector. So if you're a careerist, you don't believe in communism, you don't join the bureaucracy. Only people who believe in communism join the bureaucracy. And people that just want to make money and just want to get ahead, they go into business. They start their own business, right? You don't join the bureaucracy. In the Soviet Union, the only way to get more money was to join the bureaucracy, right? I mean, that was the only way to get ahead. If you didn't care about communism, didn't care about socialism, didn't care about any of that, you just wanted to get ahead in the world. You wanted to have more stuff. The only way you could do that in the Soviet Union was to join the bureaucracy. That was the only way you could do that. Well, now, in China, in Vietnam, in Cuba, now, if you want to get ahead and you don't believe in communism, you don't join the bureaucracy. They make sure that if you want to get ahead, you better believe in communism to be in the party. The way to get ahead in Cuba or in Vietnam or in China is to start your own company. And the state controls you and it regulates your activities. It regulates and controls your activities and all that. But so the bureaucracy no longer has a lot of these opportunist elements in it. A lot of the people that just joined the Soviet bureaucracy because they wanted to get ahead and they didn't care about communism, now in the 21st century socialism model and Deng Xiaoping theory in China and the socialist-oriented market economy, now they don't join the party bureaucracy. So, it's a different way. Bureaucracy is just a fact. When you're building socialism on the basis of scarcity, you're going to have bureaucracy because there's going to be a scarcity of goods. And there's going to be some people that are going to have to play the authority role. And because they play the role of an authority, they're going to demand that they get compensation for that. Look, they're going to want more than everybody else has because they're taking on the responsibility. So there's going to be bureaucracy in every socialist society. That's going to be a reality. The question is, how do you control that bureaucracy and make sure it's loyal to communism, number one? And ultimately, how do you eventually move toward the abolition of bureaucracy? Ultimately, with communism, the stateless, classless world, the need for bureaucracy fades away. So that's when people say, China is bureaucratic socialism. Yep, huge bureaucracy in China, huge. A lot of Communist Party leaders and all of that, but that's natural. That's going to happen. And Trotsky condemning it and saying that, oh, this is bad. There's an element with Trotsky. He writes in his book, Revolution Betrayed, he says that Stalin was the natural outcome of the Russian Revolution. If it wasn't Stalin, it would have been somebody else. That the circumstances that Soviet Union was in were going to produce the Soviet Union. They were going to produce what Stalin eventually built. Socialism in one country. One party. The way the Soviet Union became, according to Trotsky, is the natural outcome of the Soviet Union, of the conditions the Soviet Union was in. So why does Trotsky condemn it? Why does he not just accept it? right? That's where it gets weird. Trotskyism gets a little bit weird that way because it's like, it's very clear, according to Trotsky, that what happened in the Soviet Union was not based on Stalin being bad. It was based on the circumstances Russia was in at the time. So why do you condemn it? Why do you join the imperialists in condemning it? It doesn't make any sense. All right. Okay. All right. Anything good about the Cultural Revolution? I don't think so. I mean, the Cultural Revolution was awful, especially the late stages of it with the Gang of Four were awful. One argument I've heard made before is people say, well, the Cultural Revolution, it's because of the Cultural Revolution in China that communism had, like, for at least 2 decades, absolute hegemony. Now in China, there's a lot of people who believe in capitalism. Now in China, there's a lot of people who believe in, like, Tibetan primitive feudalism or Buddhism. But during the Cultural Revolution, because of the Cultural Revolution, there was a period where communism had absolute hegemony. There was no competing ideology with it. And because of that, that has solidified China on the socialist road. I've heard that argument made. There may be a grain of truth in that, but it's a pretty heavy price to pay, okay? I know so many people who have, their relatives were really suffered in the Cultural Revolution, and the last years of the Cultural Revolution were an absolute nightmare. The Gang of Four period was an absolute nightmare. So, if that's one minor positive thing that came out of the Cultural Revolution, that Marxism is so well embedded among the Chinese population, because for about a decade and a half, there was no tolerance for anything but Marxism. Maybe you could argue that's one positive thing that came out of it, but it's a heavy price to pay. I would never want anyone to have to live under the conditions of the Cultural Revolution. The awful, the Gang of Four, and, deporting all the young people from the cities to the countryside, and people living in fear and mob rule and chaos. I would not want anyone to live under that. But some people have pointed out that, that because of the Cultural Revolution, Marxism was, it was for a decade, there was nothing but Marxism was allowed. And on top of that, even the Marxists were constantly, attacking each other for not being pure Marxists. The Red Guard factions were shooting at each other, etc. So because of that, it would be very, very hard to take the communism out of China, because for a decade, there was nothing but communism, and the communists were even attacking each other. So that might be something that perhaps, in Eastern Europe and all these countries, they were able to kind of erode Marxism. But in China, you had the Cultural Revolution, and that would be very hard to do. But, the Cultural Revolution was a long time ago. So there you go. All right, folks, it's been fun. It was a marathon tonight, but that's okay. I love this community. I love all of you. We are really great. The work that we are doing is really amazing. I'm very excited about the work. We're on a great journey that we're going on together. So I wish you all the best, and it's been fun. Remember that we need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Mikey, if you want to know what I think about Trotskyism, you can scroll back in the stream, or you can watch my video about what's wrong with Trotsky. I've beat that dead horse into the ground tonight. So, good night, folks. Good night.